questions answered related
Okay.
to 7.2. Did you want to be a delegation or?
Burning desire.
Recording in progress.
Okay, very good. Welcome to the February the 10th, 2026 Finance Committee. I would like to call the meeting to order. We have an agenda. Before I get that, sorry, I will acknowledge that we are today gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and my video just been reminded my video is off, so sorry, I'll start that over. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Qathet, also known as Lasqueti Island. We have an agenda before us. Does anyone want to make any changes to that agenda? And if not, would someone like to move adoption of the agenda? Director Gisborne, Director McCormick, any discussion on that? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried unanimously. We have minutes from January 13th, 2026. Are there any errors or omissions anyone wants to put forward? And if not, would someone like to move adoption of that? Director Gisborne and Director Elliott, is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, we have no formal delegations or unfinished business. We have 3 items of correspondence, all of which have business arising. So unless someone has something else urgent, I will just move on to item 7.1, which is correspondence dated January 17th from the Texada Library Coordinator regarding a request. Director McCormick?
I make the recommendation.
Okay, seconded by Director Gisborne. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing no hands up, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carried. The next up, item 7.2, is regarding correspondence from the Qathet Museum and Archives Society. And there is a 2-part recommendation. And I note that we have Mr. Finnemore and Ms. Allens from the museum in the audience. If there are any questions so maybe I'll first ask, are there any questions for our representatives from the museum and archives? And if not, what is the will of the committee?
Move.
Director Gisborne? Move the recommendation. Director McCormick seconded. Discussion on that? Director Elliott?
It's more of a question. I was trying to recall a while back when we were talking about this very subject. And I'm thinking we have a contribution agreement and that capital expenditures, do they require an amendment to the contribution agreement or is it a separate process?
Ms. Greenan can answer that, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did change the contribution agreement in 2025 to allow that the museum could use the funding for capital as long as they asked the board in advance.
Thank you.
Great. Director Gisborne.
Yes. So I'm looking at the motion to include a contribution of $275,845 to the Qathet Museum and Archives in the budget. And then the second part of the motion is a $5,000 for capital expenditures. Is that $5,000 included in the $275,000 or is that like on top of it?
I believe so, but Ms. Greenan can clarify exactly.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. No, that is included in the $275,845.
Okay. And then as a follow-up, when I take a look at our financial plan, draft 1 and draft 2, under heritage conservation, I believe had $277,000. So this is actually a reduction of just under $2,000 if this motion passes. Is that correct?
Thank you. Through the Chair. No, that includes the administration fee. So the contribution for the museum in the budget is $275,844. So it would be an increase of $1.
Okay.
What you've seen.
Okay, that's not going to break the bank. I'm happy.
Okay, great. Are any other questions or issues, discussion? Seeing none, I will then call the question on the motion, the 2-part motion. All those in favor? None opposed, carried unanimously. The next one up is a request from the Lasqueti Community Association, which is essentially the same as they had last year. They requested last year plus 3%. I'll make the motion. I'll move the recommendation. Would someone like to second that, Director McCormick? Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll just mention this is, the community association sometimes reaches out to me. I talk with them a bit about this to help them through the process. The process, I think, works well. They've had the contribution agreement now for 4 or 5 years. So I think it works smoothly and they're using the money reasonably. Okay, I will. And actually, sorry, one other thing is if you recall, they came to us with a letter asking if they could look into internet. So that's part of what they're suggesting. They will do some internet feasibility assessment. Okay, I will then call the question on this. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, very good. We are on to the big item of the agenda. Let me just move down to my notes. So we have an updated draft 2 of our budget, which includes a lot of detail that I appreciated very much. And we have 6 recommended motions. For structuring the process, I think there are 4 steps. First, I will ask our Manager of Financial Services, Ms. Greenan, if she has a presentation and any other information to share with us before we start discussions. Then I will offer the committee a round of questions. We can each ask some questions to clarify, without making motions, just to clarify what's in the proposed budget. Then I believe we should consider the recommended motions, the 6 that are in the agenda. And finally, I'll open the floor to allow members to put forward any other motions that are desired to be put forward. So with that, I will hand the floor over to Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, I do have a presentation. It doesn't have a lot of new information, with the exception of I did add some information about the BC assessment changes into the presentation. Other than that, everything is pretty well outlined, I think, in the report. And but I'll just give an overview. And so I'll share my screen right now. So you should be able to see my screen. Okay.
Yes.
So this is, I'm pleased to present draft 2 of the 2026 to 2030 financial plan. In this presentation, I will review again the assumptions that went into this budget, just because some of them have changed compared to 2020 or compared to draft 1. I won't go over a lot of the highlights and capital plans because those were outlined in draft 1, in the draft 1 presentation, and they are also quite detailed in the financial plan documents that you have. I will review the changes from draft 1, and then I'll go over again some reserve fund concerns that we do have for Myrtle Pond Water, Land Sewer, and the fire departments. And then I'll do quite an overview of the community works funds, how the new what that would look like under the new policy changes, and then I'll review some BC assessment changes because they are quite significant, and then I'll just go over the cost per $100,000 based on draft 2 as proposed, the cost per average home based on draft 2, and then I'll entertain any questions. And of course, you can ask questions as I go through the slides. In the assumptions, we're looking at operational costs. So we've used specific estimates, or we've increased the budgets by 3 to 5% for a lot of items. Return on investments, we're projecting 2%. Hopefully we'll get more than that, but that's what we were projecting just to be on the safe side. The CPI came in at 2.1% for BC. So that CPI increase affects a lot of our contracts that we have, where they have an increase based on the CPI. Future borrowing, is only for unanticipated borrowing, anticipated borrowing that hasn't been put in place yet. So we're projecting 5 to 6%. And payroll allocations, they're still based on the 2024 time and motion study, and draft 3 will be based on the 2025 time and motion study. So there might be some changes to where the salaries and wages are allocated throughout the different services. So there's a lot of changes from draft one. What we've looked at is in general administration, there seem to be, we're looking that there might be a significant surplus from 2025 from underspending in 2025. So I'm proposing that we, there already was a big chunk of the surplus proposed to be used in 2026, but I'm proposing that we use $300,000 more of that. And then we use that, part of that to increase the short-term debt payment. So we have a short-term debt payment, for the Unit 201 unit renovations. And this would basically, if we increase that by $210,000, we will only have one more year of payments at $190,000, and then that will be paid off. So it will be paid off in 2027 rather than in 2028. Benefits and overheads projections, there was a bit of a, I had to make a bit of a change to what we were projecting. So those went down by 121,000. We've increased the budget for website accessibility audit and updates by $12,530. So that's where the reduction in the general administration budget comes from. The grants and aid general, there's an increase because between draft one and draft two, the board made a motion to increase the general grants and aid by $5,000. Regional parks, there was an increase to the projected benefits and overhead of $26,873. In waste management, there's a small increase of $4,711. And the main reason for the increase is we found out our actual insurance premiums for 2025. And so we had to increase our projected allocation for 2026 by $23,000. We reduced the benefits and overhead, we were tweaking those, and reduced the salaries and wages through some tweaks in what the actual cost might be. We added in the rural recycling depot rental. That's we rent the recycling depot from the Malaspina Fire Department and from the Northside Community Hall. And we had to add in the data bridge annual license, and then the debt interest change. So we had a bit of a decrease because the board approved going to a 10-year debenture debt. And so the interest rate is lower than we projected if we went to a 20-year debenture debt. But I just wanted to let you know too that is just the only reason it's down in 2026 is because there's no principal payment until 2027, because we'll enter the debenture debt in 2020, spring of 2026. So the first payment we'll have will be in the fall of 2026, and that will be interest only. And then we'll have our first principal payment will be in 2027. So the debt payments will go up in 2027, but not in 2026. Electoral area admin, we had a small increase of $4,041, and that is due to the projected cost of the additional Community Works Fund committee that is being developed. And we also had a reduction in the benefits and overhead, just some tweaks to those costs. In the planning department, we reduced the budget by $30,565, and that was because we had some of the housing capacity grant. There was a surplus left over in 2025, so we're bringing 15,000 of that over to 2026 for use in the planning budget. Again, some tweaks to the benefits and overhead. So there's a reduction there of 14,459. And because of those changes, the administration fee reduced by $1,395. In the development service, that's reduced by $6,687. And again, that's some tweaks in the benefits and overhead projections and a small change in the salaries and wages. In the grants and aid, there is a reduction of $28,555, and that is because the board decided to make those changes between draft one and draft two. Northside Fire, it's a small increase of $8,485, and that is because we had a grant the Next Generation 911 grant was in the operating budget, and then there was some equipment that was also in the operating budget. So between the two, that was moved out to capital. So there was an increase to the operating budget because the because the grant was more than the equipment that was moved out. And then there's $3,291 change from a reduced insurance estimate based on the 2025 actuals. Reduced administration fee of $3,000 because of the changes in the operating budget. Reduced benefits and overhead of $1,511. So the one thing I wanted to bring to the board's attention, again, we did talk about it at draft 1, is the Merle Pond Water Reserve Fund. We did have some changes in the projected reserve at year end, and the reserve is now projected at $167,135 after the projected 2026 spending, which the board will consider at this meeting if they want to fund that from Community Works. But with that spending, we're projected at $167,135, which isn't a lot for the water system, because the costs for water systems are quite high. No matter what you do, they're just high. But what we're also proposing is that we increase the operating reserve. So right now the operating reserve is $30,000, and that is basically there in case there is an unanticipated major repair, which can be quite costly. So discussions with the general manager of operational services indicates that we should maybe be at about $50,000. So we're proposing that we use part of the requisition to increase the operating reserve to $40,000 in 2026, and then a further $10,000 of it to increase it to $50,000 in 2027. And then we'll leave it at that level unless we get new information that says that it should change again. And that means that we have $36,444 available for a capital reserve contribution. So what we're recommending is that we have a full rate review in early 2026. And in your budget package, you'll see that we are recommending hiring a consultant to help with that rate review, because they have vast experience, lots of knowledge to bring to the table that might really help us with our getting the rates that make us more sustainable. Land Sewer Reserve Fund. The reserve fund is projected at $98,069. And we're also proposing that we increase the operating reserve. So right now the operating reserve in the Land Sewer Service is $20,000. So we're proposing that we increase that to $29,000 in 2026, and then basically increase it over time to $50,000 in 2029. That way we don't put all of our money into the operating reserve, but there's still some money to put into a capital reserve. There's not much to put into the capital reserve. There's $8,323 available. And again, we're also proposing a full rate review for early 2026, and then proposing that we potentially hire a consultant to help with that rate review to bring some extra expertise to that review to make the rates more sustainable. And also the reserve fund concerns for the fire services. That staff did present a proposal of what the board would need to put away annually so that all of the capital replacement plans could be funded mostly by reserve. So they are still a bit low. We are making some good strides in the reserves, but they would still require debt financing or Community Works funds to replace the assets over time. They couldn't be, the majority of them couldn't be funded by reserves with the levels of reserves that we have. And now I wanted to talk a bit about the Community Works funds. So we have a new policy in place, and what the policy aims to do is to try to allocate the funding over time so that each area gets its proportional share of funding based on a allocation-based funding and an allocation per population. So as you can see in the first part of the table here, if you can see it, it might be quite small. Anyway, we have $3,918,655 that has been spent over time. So the target would be to try to say, okay, what would we have to do to make that spending more equitable? So to make that spending equitable, we would want, based on population, we would have wanted to have spent 736,100 in Area A, 939,392 in Area B, 1,201,119 in Area C, and 675,210 in Area D, and $366,834 in Area E. But the spending wasn't spent that way. And the main reason that it wasn't spent that way is that the board looks at, its strategic plan and what makes the most sense to fund. And also there, in some areas, there isn't a lot to spend that money on. For example, with the prior year's agreements, you could spend the money on water and sewer. That was always one that could always be spent. But transportation, transit, there was different projects, but there wasn't a lot in Area C, for example, that lent itself as an eligible project. So that is why you'll see there's more spending in Area A and B and D and E than there is in Area C. So the new policy proposes to try to make up for that over time with some aspirational target allocations. So in 2025, we had an unallocated balance of $1.1 million available to be allocated to the different electoral areas. So in order to try to, make up the underspending that happened in Area C and D based on its population and a little bit in Area E, the proposal would be to try to aspire to spend more in those areas. So spend, if you're going to spend that in those areas to make up the difference, then you would want to spend $836,251 in Area C, $288,973 in Area D, and then $581 in Area E, in addition to what had already been spent. And then we look at in 2020, so that was the beginning balance. Then we received more funding in 2025. So we received another $406,373. And so if we allocate those based on that 15% allocation based funding and then the rest based on population, that would add money to each of the target allocations. And then in 2025, we had some commitments. The money wasn't spent in 2025, but it was committed to in 2025. So we've included it here so that the board can see what the allocations are for each area and the targets. So the commitments in 2025 were $190,000 for Area A, which is made up of $40,000 for Lund Sewer for a SCADA system, and $150,000 that was approved for one of the replacement fire apparatus in at the North Side Fire Hall. And then in Area E, there was a commitment to fund $300,000 for a replacement apparatus for the Lasqueti on the Fire Hall. There were two other projects that were committed to previously, but those were the manager of operational services and the manager of asset planning. They decided that those projects weren't going to go forward, so we've taken those off. They were $25,000 each for Area A and B for some asset management planning, but the asset management planning is being done in-house. So that brings then the cumulative 2025 target allocations to, as you see on here, the target allocation ideally would be to spend, less money in Area A and more money in Area B, C, D, and then less money in Area E. And then what we do is we look at the positive differences. The positive differences we exclude because we don't want to look at the underspending. We're looking at the overspending. We're looking at the underspending. And the positive differences come out to $1.4 million, but that is more than we have in the pot. So basically, then we go down to 2026. What we do have in the pot that is unallocated is $1,042,000. And so what we want to do is we want to aspire to allocate those funds to the areas that have traditionally been underfunded, which are C and D. So we want to, to get their spending up to more of an equitable allocation. We want to target spending of $783,090 in Area C and $259,088 in Area D. And then, of course, in 2026, we'll receive more funding, and then that moves the target a little bit. And so once the board looks at its commitments for 2026, then staff will look at the targets again, and then we'll give you the new target base going forward with the money that is left unallocated. I don't know, Director, I wondered if Director Fall would like to add anything because he was instrumental in developing this. Would you like to add anything?
Well, maybe just one thing, which is, and I really appreciate this. I know it's a lot of numbers, and it's going to take a bit for us all to wrap our minds around. But I think once it's done a couple rounds, it'll be really clear. So it's just this line in the bottom, the one above the commitments 2026, the cumulative target allocation. That one, which adds to 1,448,000, that's the remaining balance of 1,042 plus what we've received, 400,000. So those targets are the aspirational targets from the policy. So as you can see, Area A is still in the negative, so it has a negative aspiration, but it's a lot less. It's reduced by 76,000. Area E has a fairly big negative aspirational target. In other words, avoiding more project because it'll take a while to kind of recover the 300,000 that was generously granted to Area E. And then the areas B, C, and D have varying amounts ranging from almost 194,000 in Area B, 1,085,000 for Area C, and 429. So those are the kind of guiding, in addition to the other line above that, which are in a way the guiding targets that the committee, the new committee and the finance committee can look at to assess how well we're keeping on track between the targets based on the policy and the actual spending.
Thank you. So I think the key message is that we do want to, when you're looking at projects, you might want to consider to get spending more equitable. If there are worthy projects in Area C and D, the board might want to consider allocating funds to those projects. So now I wanted to review the BC assessment changes. So this slide shows the changes from the 2025 revised values to the 2026 completed values. And this is significant because this includes the change to the mill property. So you will see, for example, in major industry, the major industry went from 119 million to 18 million, and that is because of that reduction. But there is an offsetting change of increase of 58 million to the business and other, and that is because it changed hands so that the classifications have changed. So what this means is that for the qathet region overall, there is a 2.75% overall increase, and the change is an increase of $204 million. So that's overall. So now I'll go through by area. So if you look at, this is the assessed values per area. So the city of Paul River increased by 2.2%. Sechelt Nation Government District decreased by 3.13%. Area A increased by 3.74%. Area B 2.34%. Area C 3.16%. Area D's assessments went down by 0.52%. And Area E's assessments increased by 11.85%. And then the rest of the table just shows the different service areas, which are combinations of those areas. So if we look at the non-market change role comparison report, what this report shows us is any non-market change. So basically any inventory that's been added. What it also shows is, there could be inventory that's added, or there could be inventory that was, that changed classification. So that will result in a non-market change. And the other thing that it could be is, if BC Assessment didn't have something that they realized was there. So something that they found that they realized should have been assessed. So the non-market change shows that there is a 2.21% of the increase is due to a non-market change. So $164 million of the of the change is due to new inventory and non-market, compared to not just market value changes.
Ms. Green, before you go on, I noticed there's two directors had their hands up, and maybe it was something
Oh, sorry.
pertinent right
I
now.
didn't see that.
No, I just got notified because I was watching your presentation. It was our corporate officer, but Director McCormick and Director Gisborne had their hands up, I believe.
Thank you.
So
I
if it's
just
something
wanted to
related to
know.
it, okay,
Thank you.
go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chair Fall. I wanted to know if these charts were in the printed agenda. I'm just trying to follow along in the material that I have and what page it would be on.
That's gonna be my question.
No, sorry, they aren't in the printed agenda. I could distribute this after the meeting.
Okay.
We can't really see them.
Yeah, they're really
Oh.
hard to read.
Okay. So yes, I will distribute them after the meeting.
So I wonder if we could get printouts now, like just printed copies.
What are the numbers you say? I can't see them.
Yeah, Chair, I have good vision. I can read it, and I have a pretty photographic memory, but I can't remember all those numbers. And I would love a copy and a work along.
Oh, okay.
It would be most efficient to get it afterwards. I think to pause now might take time, and maybe
The only problem is I'm not following the conversation because I can't see what she's talking.
Yeah.
So you can talk and I still wouldn't be able to follow along.
Okay.
corporate officer. I see.
I
Sure.
could then.
If we could have a 5-minute recess, we could go and print those.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we do that then?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, because I don't remember seeing that, and now I don't always read everything on a computer as well. They didn't get a hard
Recording
copy.
stopped.
So, but this is something, and I can't read that. I'm
Okay, thank you.
So we're just
Recording
waiting
in
for the
progress.
welcome back. We just took a short break so staff could print off the nice presentation we've been looking at, and I want to express a lot of appreciation for staff for going and doing that, and getting copies in front of the directors. I will hand it back over to our manager of financial services, Ms. Greenan, to continue. Thank you, Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yeah, sorry about that. I was just trying to keep all of the information together because it is from BC Assessment, so I didn't want to parse it up and make it, just use parts of it. So we've just reviewed what the non-market change is. So the bulk of the change is from non-market. And now this slide shows, and it's even smaller, of course, it shows the change in each electoral area. So electoral area, the graph down at the bottom shows the distribution of the changes. So basically what this shows is that of the changes in assessment, the bulk of them are between 5.1 and 10% increase. And then also 0.1 to 5% increase. So basically area A, the bulk of the properties went up between 0.1% and 10%. And then in area B, the bulk of the properties went up between negative 0.1% and 5%. So, they had less of an increase in area B than there was in area A. And then in area C, the bulk of the properties went down by 0.1% to a decrease of 0.5%, or sorry, 5%, decrease of 5%. So a decrease for most properties in area C. And in area D, the bulk of the properties went between decrease of 0.01 to negative 5% to an increase of 5%. So between negative 5 and 0.5% or 5% increase. And in area E, there is a change of the bulk of the properties. So the area E had the largest market value increase, and those went between 5.1% and 15% increase.
Ms. Green, before you go on, I was just told Director Elliott has a question, I presume, on this. Director Elliott?
Yeah, so we've moved on to the next slide, which is great, except for I still would like to understand the first slide that we were on when we stopped,
Oh, okay.
preferably.
So this one here?
Yeah, because we weren't able to see that while you were talking about it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. So this slide shows the non-market change. So the change in for the whole region, so it's not divided up between city and electoral areas. This is the whole region, including the city of Paul River. And it shows that there was a non-market change, a total non-market change of $164 million across the region. And the biggest change was there was a decrease of vacant land. So vacant land must have been developed. And then residential single family, there was a non-market, so basically new inventory of $93 million of new inventory. And so most of it is in the residential area. So you can see like $148,000 of the change is new residential inventory that's been put onto the market. So residential strata, residential other, and it breaks it down by single family, strata, and other. So the biggest change is in the single family residential. And then there was a big change as well in the utilities, and that part of that is probably due to the reclassification of the mill property. And then, as I said, the major industry went down by 108 million, and business and other increased by 52 million. Sorry, was there any more questions on that slide? Oh, there's lots of hands up.
Oh, it's
I'm
not
just
okay.
trying to
I
get
can't
the
see
chair.
everyone.
It's
Okay.
tough to
Okay.
chair
Yeah. Sorry.
virtually.
Yeah. No, I'm staring at the screen being under. So Director Lennox, go
Intently
ahead.
thinking, yes, I know. Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question, because this is a very informative slide here. Trying to understand, under property class 7 managed forest land, that's a drop of almost $3 million, it looks like. Is that community forest? Is that like, what is the managed forest land? And why, and I guess the second follow-up, sorry, Ms. Greenan, why a precipitous drop in of almost $3 million?
Sorry, I don't have the answer to those questions.
Okay.
I would have to ask BC Assessment why there was a drop and exactly what they put into managed forest land. I think it's all of the forest land, not just community forest, but all of the forest land that is tenured out to the different forestry that's available for logging.
And if I may, I could answer part of that, which I don't believe it would include the community forest since that's provincial land. This would be the private managed forest land.
Okay, thanks. It's just very interesting when you see we're talking in the millions and you see a minus by it, so it's impactful. Thank you. It's really interesting.
Okay, we good to carry on? Okay. Oh, Director Elliott has a question still.
Thank you, through the chair. The down grading in the major industry is obviously the mill. The upgrading in utilities is because they've reclassified those lands as utilities, and business and other is that also light industrial, or is it just business and utilities, or is light industrial something else?
Light industry is I don't know exactly what they put in there, but I think it's more like industry, but not manufacturing. So it's they have two different classes of industry. I would have to actually look up exactly what they put in there.
But for sure, business and other and utilities is where the reclassification comes in for the mill.
Yes, I could actually look up exactly what we, oopsie. To look at the actual mill change. Just 1 second here.
Make sure I understand.
Sorry, I'm just trying to have to find it. Maybe I can send that information out to the directors to let them know exactly what the changes were from the mill.
That would be great, just because I was trying to figure out if the overall amount was bigger or smaller, but.
Okay, we have one more question by Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just building on this a little bit, maybe to help Ms. Greenan, I think we're all everywhere in the community. We're trying to understand the impact of the mill, and what we're seeing here as a class of utility is increased 70 million, excuse me, and the major industry has decreased 98 million. So I'm trying to keep it simple for me and the other people that we're having these discussions. Am I correct to say that it looks like just for this year at least, there's a negative $28 million effect of those two classifications? Like, you see where I'm going with this is.
Unless it's another two.
Yeah, and that's where Director Elliott is asking as well. So we're just trying to understand, like, what is the actual, impact on taxation from the mill and those changes in classifications?
Oh, the the impact, it is incorporated into draft 2 of the budget.
Okay.
So those numbers that you see incorporate the changes from the mill. So I just I did find the report here. So there was a change of 32. So basically transportation and utilities, there were only a portion of it was because of actually a small portion of it was because of the mill. And the bulk of the change from the mill was to the industrial, changing from major industry to business and other.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is where people will infer different things from numbers, just like I did. Thank you for the details.
Very good. Great. We're good to go on, or we have
Yes,
another
thank you
hand
so
up?
much.
Oh, Director Gisborne. Yes. Okay. One more. Hopefully we can allow Ms. Greenan to finish. But yeah, you gotta. This is interesting, and I think it's really important.
Thank you.
Page, so.
This is something I'm very interested in. And it comes to like how the tax rates play out, because as we know in electoral areas, we don't get to set the mill rate or tax rate between the different classifications. And I guess my question is, when I take a look at major industry and I took a look at the provincial government's tax rate, and it looked like when something goes from, say, industry to business, it goes from, say, being 100% down to like 71%. Do we know what like the kind of provincial government tax rates are between these classifications? Because say, I see on like one of the previous pages, $100 million decrease in major industry, but then a $58 million increase on business and other. Business and other gets a lower tax rate than major industry, as I understand. So it's on the one hand, there's a decrease in the assessment total, but then there's also, it's moved to a different classification, and therefore there's even another decrease on the rate. I think that's a correct understanding, and I'm just wondering, do we know those, like the ratio, or on another page?
Yes. Yeah, no, I don't have the ratios there, but yes, the ratios are, sorry, I'm just gonna grab them here. So the ratios are, yeah, so the major utilities pays the highest. So utilities is taxed at 3.5 times the residential assessments. And then major industry is 3.4 times, light industry is 3.4 times, business and other is 2.45 times. So basically when something moves from major industry to business, you do lose some taxation because the tax rate change is lower for business and other than it is for major industry.
Okay, no, that really helps clarify the 3.5, the 3.4, and the 2.4, and I think that's something the public is also going to be a little keen on is you get a decrease in the total assessed value, talking hypothetically about the mill, because of course we're kind of assuming based on these numbers, and then of course going from industry to a business classification and an assessed value is kind of like a double whammy. But no, thank you very much. Please carry on. Sorry.
And actually, before I'll add a couple thoughts on here just to help add to the thought process, which is if you look at the total change, of residential properties go up 2.48%. All classes go up 2.78. In other words, the non-residential classes are going up by more than 2.48%. And so that's driven mostly by utilities and business and other, offset by major industry. So in other words, there is an ameliorating effect there to a certain degree. Major industry has this 3.4 factor, but utilities is a bit higher, business and others lower, but they're still going up a little bit more than residential. So there is a bit of an offset there. So maybe
Oh, no. Sorry, they aren't going up more than residential. That's the total for all the classes, the 2.78%. So overall, they're just going up by 3.3%.
Oh, I see. It's adding by 3.3.
Yeah, it's not two subtotals. It's just the 2.48% total for residential, and then another 0.3% for all the other classes. So 2.78% overall.
Okay, so maybe I'll allow Ms. Greenan to carry on unless is there any other hands waving there? Seeing none. Okay, Ms. Greenan, maybe we can move on. Thank you for that. That was a good pause.
So I've kind of reviewed these, like where the major distribution of value changes are for areas A through E. And then, so basically those were the slides that I wanted to show you for the property value changes. So were there any more changes or more questions on the property value changes before I move on?
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I think this might be one of the first times I've seen these, figures of, how many properties went up and went down, and I absolutely love that kind of data. And I love how we've got the data for areas A through E. And I'm wondering, is there similar data for, say, the municipality? Is that over at the municipality site, or I'm just kind of curious how the municipalities' property assessments changed in comparison to the electoral area? I'm just wondering if that's data available or if that's going to be a lot of work to find out. Or the graphs skewed all over the place because of the mill.
Yeah, so I would have to get that data from the city of Paul River. But the other thing we could do is I could ask BC Assessment if they would come in and present to the board. Then you could ask more detailed questions. Is that something that
for last financing?
With the city.
Yeah.
Okay, Director Elliott says I can probably find it on the city's financial plan potentially. That's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Greenan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Through the chair. So that ends the portion of my presentation for the assessed value changes. And so I just wanted to let you know what the residential tax rates based on the 2026 completed roll values. So these completed roll values include all of those changes that we just outlined. And so what that means is, as shown on the slide, it basically tax rate decreases for most areas. For City of Paul River, we're looking at 4.95%, $4.95 decrease per $100,000. In Area A, a decrease of $2.50 per $100,000. On Sabre Island, an increase of $5.65 per $100,000 per year. Area B, an increase of $4.35 per 100,000. Area D, an increase of $3.39 per 100,000. Sorry, Area C, $3.39. Area D, a decrease of $1.71 per 100,000. And Area E, a decrease of $7.18 per 100,000. And then per average household, we're looking at within the city of Paul River, an annual decrease of $19.73 per household per year, an increase in Area A of $44.28, an increase for Sabre Island of $32.32, Area B, an increase of $59.56, Area C, an increase of $64.98, and Area D, a decrease of $27.88. And in Area E, an increase of $116.31 per average household. And so that ends my presentation. And there will be another draft. Draft 3 is scheduled for March 18th. And then adoption is scheduled for March 25th, 2026.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let me just make sure I can see the room. So now we'll do a round before we consider the recommended motions and other motions. Why don't we go around for general questions about the budget and any other questions that directors may have. Anyone up for going first? Director Elliott and then Director McCormick.
Well, thank you, Chair. My question, I guess, has to do a little bit with the rec center is going to be under negotiations in this next coming year. If those negotiations result in an increase, when they probably will because of the way costs have gone up, how would we approach that as far as this budget year? I don't know if there's reserves to handle any differences or whether we need to put it in the budget.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. That would have to be put into the budget. Because right now there's just enough to do a $240,000 contribution. So, and there are no reserves for the sub-regional recreation service. So yes, it would have to be considered in budget draft 2 or draft 3.
Just a follow-up, if I might, given that we don't really have an agreement to figure that out, would the board then be advised to try and make a guess, and if we guess too high, it can go into a reserve, and if we guess too low, then it hampers our negotiations? Is that would be the assumption I'm making?
Your surplus.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. There is new business at 9.1. It's a notice of motion from Director Southcott. And he is asking that the board consider putting the maximum requisition in the budget to allow for some room. So the board could consider doing that. Or they could, decide on a different amount. But that amount in his notice of motion is the maximum that can be requisitioned without a change to the bylaw.
Okay, I could ask my question at that time, but what I was trying to ask was, what happens if we guess too high? Is that, would the additional money then go into a reserve, or would that be handled?
Ms. Greenan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, to the chair. Oh, sorry, I misunderstood your question. No, so if you guess too high, then that money would go as a surplus. So it would stay within that service and it would go forward as a surplus to be used in the subsequent year.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Director McCormick, I believe, was next.
Thank you, Chair. That's a perfect segue into where I was kind of going. There's something that has been bothering me about the way we do our budget. It has bothered me for a number of budgets now, but I guess I'm about to express it. And that is, and I'm referring to a paragraph on page 3 of the report, where it says, reducing reliance on prior year surplus. That staff aim to minimize reliance on prior year surpluses to ensure the sustainability of services and stabilize annual tax requisitions. In fact, I think putting surpluses into reserves is really the wrong thing to do. There may be occasions where it's valid, like if a project isn't finished or it was delayed, but it's still anticipated to happen. But other things like where it comes in under budget, or plans change and you're not going to do the project after all, or something else happens. So, I think by enabling, and I'm really glad to see where Ms. Greenan, you've added in surpluses toward, the 26 requisition. I think that's great. I'm really glad to see that. I guess my question is, can we make that an overarching policy that whenever possible, over and above all the reserves that take into account asset management and replacement and all the other things, can that money be rolled into, the next year's operating budget? And I'll just, as a way of one little example in that, when I look at the Texada Island Rec Commission, and I'm looking at page 305 of the report, where the revenues greatly exceed the expenditures for every year. And I don't understand that. Are we taxing too much in relation to anticipated funds? So all of that's kind of boiled into using our surpluses differently where possible. And is that possible? And would we then not get inequities like I see in the Rec Commission budget, where the income are expenses?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, that would be a reserve fund policy, which we're working towards, and we are trying to I just wanted to talk about the Texada recreation example that was just brought up. So, for example, in the budget this year, the revenue is $158,176. And then the expenditures are the same, 176,000. So 143,544 is directly for operating expenses, and 14,632 is for the reserve. So that leaves a total reserve fund balance of $90,000 for that service. So basically what that means is that you have $90,000 if you wanted to do some, some future work. And for example, in the capital budget, there is, over the next few years, there is in 2026, there is capital of $133,000, which is using the reserve, and then a further $59,000 in 2027. And then, $10,000 in 2028, $10,000 in 2029, and then 49,700, which leaves you a reserve of 62,345. So, I mean, you could potentially cut that reserve, down by 62,345, and then in 2030 you would have zero in your reserves if that's what you want to do. But then you would have to, in 2031, you might have, if you do have a project in 2031, then you might have to have a big tax hike to do that project. So that's up to the board. If you want to have a big, if you want to have a potential tax hike, then that is the board's prerogative.
Director McCormick, carry on.
Thank you. Yeah, further in relation to the Rec Commission on the capital plan, there is a dollar amount there for the tennis court resurfacing. I understand that amount has now been covered through the community forest and Powell River City Council. If that's correct, I want to say thank you for that. If it's not correct, please tell me now. I'm assuming that we could then take that money out of the required requisition for our community works anyway.
Ms. Green, is that correct?
I guess part B of that is could we use it for further upgrades that are planned for the community hall in future years, such as the new septic system, which is, I think, a year down the road? Can that be substituted?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so when I just wanted to mention before I hand it over to the General Manager of Operational Services, is that this budget was created before we found out that the community forest had decided to fund this project. So it can definitely be reassigned. And maybe I'll hand it over to the General Manager of Operational Services now.
Mr. Devereaux, the floor is yours.
Yes, through the chair. That's exactly what I was going to mention, that's a late coming item. We didn't find that out till Friday morning. So we're, planning on this money being spent. There are always projects in the capital plan coming up as assets deteriorate, as we upkeep things, building needs a new roof, all those things. So we have to build reserves in some way, or then it becomes a taxation up and down year to year type thing as major projects come online. But without speaking in the General Manager of Finance's speaking what she plans, I'm sure this will be reassessed in draft 3 as we have changes.
Thank you.
Okay, are you done for now, Director McCormick?
Yes, for now. Thank you.
Okay, so I see Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what Director McCormick was speaking to in relation to prior year surpluses and contribution to reserves. And I agree with Director McCormick on some services, because one of the challenges that we have here is we have siloed services. So when it comes to the fire department, I love the way of saying, okay, let's kind of keep the tax requisition stable. In some years, we don't spend that much because there's not a lot of issues. You get a wet summer, and then we put more into the reserves. And then there's like other services where it doesn't really make as much sense to go that model. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of doing a blanket policy statement in relation to how we use prior year surpluses and reserve contributions, because, for example, recreation complex funding contribution service, that's a fairly stable like expense. You know, it's done by typically agreement and a 5-year contribution. So, you know, the tax requisition there is pretty stable and the spending is stable. But, you know, you look at the fire departments and, you know, I think we had our presentation here a couple of weeks ago, and so far Malaspina is fairly quiet in this last quarter, which is good, which also means to be less expenses. So yeah, on that, I agree and disagree with what what Director McCormick said. And I think that that's something we're all going to keep in mind, that when we're looking at the financial plan, it's not just one big service. There's a whole bunch of individual ones. And I think if we want to adjust, you know, the reliance on prior year surplus, we should start making it specific to the service. To say, okay, for example, Texada recreation, you know, this is how we want to handle prior year surpluses. Otherwise, it kind of sends mixed messages to our finance department for which ones we want to pick and choose. I think that makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any hands shooting up right now, so I'll add myself onto the list. I have 2 questions, and I'll just comment on this surplus item first, which is I think it really matters why the surplus. I really encourage policy development. I think that'd be really useful for us to have a policy on surplus, but I think that policy needs to look at, you know, the reasons for surplus, because if surplus is because of an item being canceled, that's different from an item that cost a lot less than we anticipated. And that's different from whether an item, it was because of a grant or taxation or community works fund or contingency. There's lots of reasons for surplus. And I think a policy could get into the nuances of it in combination with the asset management needs and the reserves, because some reserves have statutory and non-statutory reserves, and those are very different purposes and flexibilities. So I have 2 questions I'll ask. First is about the actuals and the surplus, in particular in relation to the LIVFD service. And I'm trying to understand how much. So it's a 2-part question. One part's very specific and one is general. So my understanding from looking at the actuals on page 457, so way down at the bottom, is that the surplus for LIVFD is right now about $134,000 in the current financial plan, and that comes from surplus of from the reduced revenue of about $24,000 or less revenue than budgeted, lower expenses than budgeted of around 148,000, and then lower expenses on the hauls of about 10,000, and that adds up to around 134. So I guess is that correct, or am I misunderstanding something? And also, how firm are those? I mean, they may decrease as further. We're not going to get more revenue last year, but we might get more expenses. So how firm are those actuals in the LIVFD service in particular, but also in general? How much do we expect them to change? Ms. Greenan?
I think they're pretty close. Like, we still have some adjusting entries. There might be some straggling bills that come in. We try to get all of our bills in by January 31st, but that doesn't mean that we do get them all. And so we still have to go through and see if there's, there could be purchase orders that have been issued that we haven't received invoices for, or there could be invoices that are sitting waiting for approval that still have to be entered into the system. So I think they're close. I can't say they're really firm. So, for example, you're looking at about 134,000 for, so you could probably, maybe adjust that by 20,000, like say if there's $20,000 of bills that still haven't come in because they would be operational in nature. So you're probably looking at about 100, you could probably safely say $114,000 of a surplus for the Lasqueti Volunteer Fire Department.
Okay, that's great, because I know that it's everything we want. I'm sure financial staff want all the bills and all the numbers to come in, but they don't always, and I've been guilty of that myself. So, the second question, I guess I'll have 3 questions. Second question relates to the reserves, because I found I just want to say I found the details for me are great. I really liked having the budget like this, and I assume the the reason there's so much detail is perhaps that's because that's the easiest way to print out the report. Because some of the line items are really getting down to the detailed level, but the different pieces are great. And having the, on page, what page is this? Page 376 has the reserves, the totals for the reserves and the amount, the opening at the end of 2025, plus contributions, interest, and so on. So I was really looking at that because just trying to think about, what in particular might be done with LIVFD, but also in general. So I had a couple questions because I was trying to sort out, and I guess that led me, maybe it's not so much about reserves, but that looking at that made me actually ask, looking back at the services, that some of the services, the revenue doesn't seem to the actual revenue doesn't seem to show interest. So I guess I'm back on the actuals. So as an example, maybe just take one, waste management. The actuals, the budget, 2025 budget showed interest revenue of about 20,000, and then the actuals don't record that. Is that just, and I assume that's because of, would be on the reserves. But is that missing interest just hasn't been calculated in the budget yet? Or, what is the cause for that? Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair. Yes, we can't calculate the interest until all of the bills have been posted, because what we do is we look at, the beginning balance of the reserves, and then any money that's come in, any contributions, which we've posted, but then we use the reserves to fund the capital projects as they're spent. So there's still some straggling bills coming in for the capital projects. And so we have to, and because it's so fluid, we have to basically nail down, like, all of our invoices are processed. Now we can look at what is the interest owing to each of these services. So no, we can't, that's kind of one of the last entries that we do is the interest allocation, but it doesn't generally impact your bottom, like your surplus, because we generally take the interest earned and then put it right back onto the reserve. So the only time it would ever impact your surplus would be if there was an interest that we were planning on spending in the in the operational budget. But if we're just taking it straight from tacking it onto the reserve, then it's an in and out, so it wouldn't impact anyone's surpluses.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And for me, that's actually a good rationale. In that case, the interest revenue, which shows up as revenue and then goes out in and out, like you say, to transfer to reserve, and then in the reserve budget, it is just as revenue. So it's just moving it through, because that's how the accounting works. That's an example of where surplus just moves through, and makes a lot of sense because that revenue is coming from the reserve. So it doesn't, you could use it for something else, but I think that is the basis for it. That's about preserving the capital, because otherwise it erodes. So my last question, and we talked a lot about this earlier in your presentation, and it's kind of general, and it's that and I didn't ask at the time, but the assessment values for Lasqueti increased dramatically more than elsewhere. The average was in the 2%. Some areas went down. Lasqueti went up by almost 12%. And I think I know the answer. The question is, why would that happen? And I think I know the answer, which is that's just BC Assessment doing what they do, and something happened. But when you look at those, what I guess the part of the question, if I hand it over or ask you, Ms. Greenan, for an answer, is really just to confirm my understanding. When that happens, when one electoral area or one area of the regional district has property values that increase at a much more rapid rate, in this case, more than 5 times the rate, not just a little bit, 5 times, that seems to me that this actually shifts, it kind of imports a higher proportion of the taxes for shared services, administration, regional parks, and so on, into general administration. And as one example, even though it actually doesn't add up to a lot in the end, and I'll explain in a moment, but one example is the tax requisitions for general administration. They are projected to increase by less than 10% overall, but by over 18% for Lasqueti. So the general admin line is over 18%, plus 18% for Lasqueti, but plus 9 point something for everywhere else. So that's nearly twice. Now that it turns out it's actually a reasonably good year for this to happen to Lasqueti, because there's a decrease in waste management. So the opposite occurs when there's a decrease, but it still results in a net, the shared services is there's a higher, any increase means there's a higher burden for Lasqueti than otherwise would be shown. So that, I guess, so the two-part question is, do you have any idea why this might happen? Is this just a quirk of the assessment, and is this correct that this is going to shift in, and it may shift out if that changes over time?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, so there's a couple of questions there. So the first part is that the assessment that's just basically based on BC assessment, you know, if you've had market value, non-market changes, or if BC assessment has just assessed higher values onto the properties. But that shift of the percentage, so it's not actually that you're carrying that much more of the burden, but it's because the denominator changes from one year to another. You know, so the assessment base, you're not looking at a static assessment base from one year to another. So the tax rate for $100,000 is even for shared services. Everyone pays the same tax rate for $100,000. So, you know, a resident in electoral area E and a resident in the city of Paul River pay exactly the same amount of taxes for a specific shared service. It's just because there might be, yeah, more value to the property. So an assessment value doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a lower, you know, just because your assessment values go up doesn't mean your tax burden is spread out that much more, because assessment value in a different area could go up, but it depends on, like we talked about earlier, if it's in industry or business, they take a bigger portion of it. So so assessment value is just part of the equation. There's also the converted assessment value, but it's all because of that denominator changing that makes it look kind of funny. Like I've got a 14% increase for waste management in area E. That's not the case, but you know, a different percentage increase in one area than in a different area. It's the tax rates remain the same.
Exactly. Thank you for that. And of course, it matters why the increase. If Lasqueti had a big subdivision put in, the increase might be because of, you know, the high-rise apartment building that got put in there, which isn't the case. I actually looked, and for the directors, you know, you can go on the BC assessment website and click on any property and get these numbers. And so I did a kind of random sample, and sure enough, the property values on Lasqueti have all gone up, varying amounts, but that's what that distribution shows. So they're all going up by, you know, up to 15%, which has this effect. But it turns out it basically overall, I think, adds a bit less than 1%, about 0.5% onto Lasqueti's taxes. So it's that much higher overall, not counting the Lasqueti only services. Okay. I'll end my questions there and see if anyone else has questions before we go on to the next phase. So before I see Director McCormick, I'll see if there's anyone who hasn't asked yet. And if no one puts their hand up, I'll also recognize Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll try to be quick. Do I understand correctly, Ms. Greenan, that there is policy development work being done already regarding surpluses?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. There will be policy work being done. I've started some research on it, but you know, it's quite complex with regional district services. I don't think it's as complex with city services because we're not siloed, but with the siloed services, it is complex. We do want to make sure that we have a good policy. So that is something that staff are looking to develop in 2026.
Okay, well, thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for that, because that's much appreciated, and it'll be nice to flesh out all the possibilities that are out there. So I really appreciate that. Chair, my last quick question is back to the Recreation Commission and page 305 of the report. If the expenses and revenues are equal in the budget, why does this graph here on page 305 of the report show the revenues as being so much higher than the expenses? Am I not understanding the chart? I don't know.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. What we've done with lots of the services and with Texada Recreation, this will also happen with, you'll notice it with the waste management, the fire services. We do have we want to allocate the cost to different centers. So this first graph that you're seeing is the main budget. So that has all of the requisition that contains the overall requisition, the rent from the Texada Community Hall, rent from Gillies Bay School, rent from Gillies Bay Ball Field, and interest earnings. And then it has the operational expenses, like the general operational expenses. And then the next set of data that starts on page, so you'll see that graph on page 305 does show that there's more revenues than expenses. But then when you go down further and you start on page 308, then that shows you the cost of operating the Gillies Bay Community Hall. And in that case, there's only expenses. So we have $22,016 of expenses projected for that service, but no revenue coming in. So we have to use the revenue from the that comes in from the general service. It's just we just do that so that we can allocate it per. So yeah, you see on that graph on page 307, there's only expenses and no revenue. So if you look at all of those services as a group, the revenues always equal the expenses. And in fact, like the projected surplus for the Texada Recreation Commission, if you look at the final report on this, the final attachment, there's no surplus projected at all. It's $108 so to date. So it might even be in a deficit by the end of the year.
Go ahead, Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I didn't understand about the chart that included all revenue, whereas it was only general expenses. So I will remember that for future years, and thank you for that explanation.
And I'll just add, if I could, some of the items are services are simple in the sense there's revenue and there's expenses and maybe reserve and that's it. Whereas some of them are multi-part, and this is one, and it takes a bit to look at. I think where the Texada Island Recreation Commission there's a general expenses, and then it has all these sub pieces that are done. So somehow it's got to all be recorded, and it's really understanding what's actually being recorded. But the whole service, that revenue has to equal expenses and in the budget. Okay, Director Lennox, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I got a couple of hopefully quick questions here in this 462-page report. So I've been bouncing around a bit, but and some questions regarding our potential recommendation later. Page 79 refers to planning, and I'm the planning chair, so I was kind of looking at that, and then I see housing capacity analysis for electoral areas A, B, C, and D. I just don't remember what that is, and then I couldn't find the cost of it within. Like, I know we're working on a lot of housing needs. We've had reports recently, but I wasn't aware. Maybe, I don't know if there's any staff that can help me out with what the housing capacity analysis is and when it will, is it for 2026, it looks like it's planned.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if the General Manager of Planning Services is on the line.
Thank you through the chair.
Oh, Corporate Officer, go ahead. Yeah.
Ms. Rodden is not here this week, so we could forward that through director's notification.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Just quickly, the next page on 80, I see, just looking ahead a little bit, planning projects, pretty reasonable, 22,000. Then it jumps to sort of planned in the 73,000 range for the upcoming years. Is maybe just what are we looking at as far as the jump there in planning? I don't know if you can see that there on page 80.
Yes. You just bear with me for 1 minute. I can look that.
That's because I'm thinking about our projects and stuff. While you look, it seems 10,000 seems low. Please, Dave. I'm sure there's a line item on it somewhere. I just couldn't. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. No, there isn't a line item on specifically what the projects are, but I should be able to look it up here quickly.
Sorry, I know these, and you can get back to me if not. It's just looking ahead. I saw the jump there, so I was just curious.
Did you have other questions, Director Lennox?
Just sneaking in. Chair, Ms. Dykstra has snuck in the room, so maybe.
Oh, okay. Ms. Dykstra, maybe did you hear the question, or maybe Director Lennox can ask it again?
Thank you.
Yes, I can.
Through the chair, thanks. Sorry, Ms. Dykstra, and you can get back to me if you don't have it right now. I'm just looking ahead at the housing capacity analysis that's planned for this year. I'm a little fuzzy. What is that project, maybe?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, that's a project that migrated over from last year's budget.
Okay.
And I believe the general manager of financial services addressed it as a carryover. I think it looked like it was a $15,000 line item.
Okay.
From last year with a grant that was available.
Okay.
And the consultants were unable to deliver to the December 31st deadline. So
okay. So that makes a little more sense because we've been working on a lot of things, housing needs and all that. So I was just a bit fuzzy. So we're carrying over the work and we've scheduled some money. And then thanks, I have a subsequent question on the next page there and we can show you, but I asked a question around a jump in 2026 planning projects are only budgeted, I think 22,000, is it? Total, yeah, on page 80, and then it goes to 72. 650 or 500 or whatever for the next year. So the question is why the jump, I guess, is why the increase looking for 27 and ahead. You know?
I think through the chair, I do see general manager of financial administration.
Oh, Ms. Greenan maybe can answer that better. Go ahead, Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. So in the planning projects, that's where we budget for all of the OCP reviews and things like that. There's always ongoing work that the planners are doing, to update those plans. And so because we don't, they don't know exactly how the, they plan for the 2026 budget detailed, but they don't have specific details of how they're going to allocate the funds in 2027 through 2030. So that's just in there as a placeholder until they get details of how those projects will roll out. Then they could be distributed differently.
I kind of thought so. And then just finally, to page 262, and that might not be for Ms. Dykstra. I noticed she's captain on Savory Island Fire Department gets paid more than the chief. I'm just wondering, there's, again, just a small thing, but just curiously, is that because they're on call or maybe the duty officer type of responsibilities? Just another thing because we're trying to pay attention to our fire department. So maybe that's for someone else, Mr. Tom.
I don't know if, yeah, Ms. Greenan, is that better for Mr. Toms or do you, Ms. Greenan, go ahead.
Thank you. That is better for Mr. Toms, but I think it's because, is there potentially two captains that rotate beside when there's only one chief? I'm just not sure.
And Mr. Tom seems to be nodding. Do you have a
nitty gritty?
If I could, through the chair.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling to see where that's written in the financial plan. But yeah, bear in mind there's only one chief, but within the Savory department, we actually budget for 2 deputies and upwards of 3-4 captains and lieutenants. So you're seeing an accumulated total there.
Thank you very much. Makes lots of sense. Thanks.
Okay, great. So are we ready to move on to the recommended motions, part 3 of this? So we have 6 recommended motions and they're separated by, Director Gisborne, did you?
Yeah, I clicked on Savory Island Fire Department and now I lost my place. It was a question related to solid waste management, and I think that's something that's burning in all of our minds. And let's see if I get the page. I think it's like 170. Oh no, that's the itemized one. I'll go from memory. Solid waste management. When I was taking a look, it showed income and then it showed expenses, but it showed expenses as higher than income, but I didn't notice tipping fees included in the income. And I'm wondering, is the absence of the revenue from tipping fees the reason why it's showing expenses as higher than revenue? Or am I completely missing something? And I'll see if I can find the page number that I lost by getting interested in Director Lennox and stuff.
Yeah, I'll hand it over to Ms. Greenan. And waste management, of course, is one of those services with lots of sub pieces, so it's a little nuanced. But Ms. Greenan, and I see Mr. Cohenhoven's on the call too. But Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. That was what I was going to ask. If you could please direct this question to the Manager of Environmental Services.
It's on your table, Mr. Cohenhoven.
Thank you, through the chair. So yes, just confirming that the waste management service is broken down into several sections in this presentation. So each material type has its own set of pages there. So we would need to combine all of the pages, all of the revenue, and all of the expenses to see the revenue balance against the expenses. And the tipping fees would be included in that total revenue.
Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just let you know I was looking at page 171, and that shows the little bar graphs, and it was showing expenses as higher than revenues, and I'm like, I don't think that's the end all be all because we're not allowed to spend more than we bring in. But that makes sense then to kind of take them all together. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think now we're ready to move on to the recommended resolution. So the first one, I'm just pulling back up, is that the Finance Committee accept as draft 2 and as guiding information the proposed 2026 to 2030 financial plan. Would someone like to move that? Director Lennox, Director Gisborne, is there any debate on that motion, which is to accept this and knowing it's a draft, it's not the final? Seeing none, I will call the question on that. All in favor? None opposed, carried unanimously. Now we're on to the more substantive ones. So the next one is about Community Works Fund. So the motion is that the Finance Committee recommend that the board direct staff to include a number of projects in Community Works funding for funding from Community Works funding for 6 projects. Someone like to move that or an alternative, or are there questions on that, Director McCormick? Oh,
Thank you. Ms. Greenan had her hand up, but it would be about the second bullet, the tennis court resurfacing, which has now generously been approved by both the Community Forest and Powell River City Council. So it doesn't need to be there.
Okay, so Ms. Greenan, maybe, I saw your hand up. Maybe you have some information to help us.
No, thank you, Chair. That was all I was going to mention, was that it was covered through the Community Forest Grant. Okay,
so if we move this, we would, without that piece, would that be the appropriate action? Yes. Okay. So I guess before we put the motion, maybe if there's any questions on any of these items before the motion goes forward, are they acceptable? And if there aren't any questions, does anyone want to make the motion? Director Brander, Director Gisborne? Motion's on the table. Is there discussion on this item? Director McCormick? That's without the tennis court. So I assume, Director Brander, that was without the tennis court item, right?
Yeah, I think Director Gisborne was the mover, but yes, I think that's it.
Yes.
Oh, no, Director Gisborne. That was without and seconded by. Okay, that's the 5 items, not including the tennis court.
I believe the mover and seconder are in agreement that it does not include Gillies Bay tennis court.
I have a question.
Very good. So Director Elliott, go ahead.
I just have a question about the Gillies tennis resurfacing. Is that a donation to a nonprofit, or was that an asset of the QRD?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, that is a QRD asset.
Okay, so the program what Community Forest was doing was for nonprofit grants. So I'm wondering how this was applied. Was it applied for by a nonprofit?
So I see Mr. Devereaux, maybe he knows the answer.
I'm thinking it was put into the program illegally.
Hey, we're not going to use that word in these
Well,
chambers, but we'll
what
ask
I mean
questions about
is,
whether.
the grant
I know.
program is for nonprofits,
Yeah,
not for
no, I
other
understand. There's a
governments,
question
so-
about the eligibility. So let's, Mr. Devereaux maybe can clarify, and we should, if there's a
'Cause I
question, then we
wanna
need
get
to.
that question answered before we for sure don't put it in them.
Yeah, you're quite correct. Mr. Devereaux?
Yes, through the chair, if I may. You may remember back in April or so of last year, there was a report from myself to the board asking to apply for grants. Actually, I applied to the community forest for that grant on behalf of Turk, or the Texada Island Recreation Commission, for that resurfacing.
Okay, so here's my thoughts on that. We may want to double check with staff to ensure eligibility before you, I think if you put it in this motion and it later gets confirmed that it is indeed eligible for that funding, you can cancel the project and the Community Works Fund just reabsorbs that back in for allocation somewhere else. Whereas if you don't put it in, then I guess you'd have to go back and make a decision about the Community Works Fund. So I don't know which way you'd want to go with that, but I'm concerned that so those were recommendations from the Community Forest Board. And we have, various programs and policies in place around who is eligible for a nonprofit grant and how we donate to within the city or whatever. And I just want to double check that that doesn't end up being an ineligible project.
So if I might make a suggestion, given that the community forest has given the grant, the question is whether it's eligible, whether that would be reversed if there's a problem. So what may be appropriate would be to either have a separate motion or amend this motion, leaving the money out from the Community Works Fund, but adding a clause to direct staff to confirm eligibility from the community forest funding. And if that were to the reason I say that is if that confirmation didn't come through, then we could always, add, reconsider or re-put the amount from Community Works Fund in the March meeting. It doesn't really matter either way, but if that if we assume the eligibility is fine, let's take that as assume our staff have done and everything's been works out, then we don't have to do anything more. But if for some reason there is a hitch because of the nature of what the commission is, whether it's considered eligible or not. So that's what I would suggest, but
yeah, just to add to that, I know as a person voting over there about those things, we had assumed that everything all the recommendations coming from the community forests were applications from nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Director Gisborne and then Director McCormick.
It's part of the criteria.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Naturally, I don't sit on city council, so I don't know all the ins and outs. Hold on, I have the floor, Chair. The decision of the city is the council made a decision to award the community forest grant. So that decision has happened. Now I guess we're debating on whether or not the city council is going to, reconsider that decision and claw it back, which is not a decision of this table. But I did, in the time that we were going around the table on this topic, I had a chance to pull up Council Policy 26, whatever, 2.1 evaluation criteria, number 6. We encourage grant applications from community groups, not-for-profits, public sector agencies, and local government. So reading the city's policy, it seems we are eligible. Council made a decision, money's been handed out. So I'm kind of confused what we're really debating about here because this isn't city council, it's a regional district. And if the city wants to change their mind and claw back funding after the decision, I don't really know how that works over there, but this isn't that table. I'm fine with the motion as it is because I'd be surprised if the city starts reaching out and going, well, hold on, we made a mistake. Because that also implies that the city council isn't really, doing its own due diligence, but that's not this table. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Director McCormick.
Thank you. And a quick question, if I may, to Director Elliott. So that's been approved by City Council, is that correct? And that you wouldn't revisit that decision, a motion like to reconsider, would only be made if there was new information, I guess, that impacted something. So if the decision has been made, and as a local government on the list that Director Gisborne read out qualify, I guess my question is, what is the risk that this would be turfed out of the nest, so to speak?
So it becomes a little bit, I think the decision has been made, yes. There are a couple of conflicting council decisions that may have caused confusion. One was the one that we made like at the end of last summer to set a budget for nonprofit grants at $640,000. So that doesn't strictly change the written policy, but it was intended as guidance to the applications to this intake. The reconsideration that we just did was to reconsider our decision of before. And even though it was pointed out that some of those don't meet those prior council decisions, that as far as our priorities went, it didn't specifically talk to whether and we were over the 640 anyway. We did that as well. We made that conflict. So honestly, I think it probably will go through altogether. But I do know that we made decisions about that intake to focus on nonprofits, and I don't know if we somehow breached our own resolutions and how that's handled. And so I'm not an expert on any of that. I just was flagging that we had intended to be doing nonprofit grants with that intake. And it doesn't appear that that happened. But anyway, thanks.
Director McCormick?
Yeah, the nonprofit you might have heard from is the Texada Pickleball Society, because they use the tennis court, there's lines painted on it for pickleball as well as tennis. So they're
Know all about pickleball.
that could be, I'm not sure.
And I'm not saying it would or it would not, or there might be a problem or might not be a problem. I was surprised to hear that it was an application not from a nonprofit, given that we had specified we were looking for applications from nonprofits for that particular intake. And so that was news to me, that's all. And it caught me off guard.
So I actually have a question for staff, because I think we're, as Director Gisborne pointed out, we're, the motion we have here, which doesn't include that tennis court, we have the information we have is that the grant has been approved from the community forest. And so the question I have for Ms. Green, and if I might, is if for some reason that grant wasn't provided, would we, and if we didn't include this from Community Works Fund in the in this motion going forward, would we be able to revisit that later in the year? Does it have to be before the budget, or would we be able to amend the budget later to include it? In other words, I'm asking that because if we can do that, then I would suggest we just move forward with the motion and address that if it comes up. Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, the board could do a budget amendment to include Community Works for that project, or the board could do it the other way and just not use the funding from the Community Works if the Community Forest Grant is deemed eligible.
Right, thank you. And I think I say that because what it would look like in our budget is right now it would show up as revenue from the community forest. If that revenue didn't materialize, like any grant, we would have a decision coming to us at the time that we learned that, if it happened, and we would make an appropriate decision, one of which could be to say, let's fill it in with Community Works Fund. So in that sense, I think it's given the information we have, the motion on the table is, I don't know if anything else needs to be done. Is there further discussion on this issue or this item? Okay, so the motion on the table is as in the agenda without the tennis court surfacing project. Seeing no other hands up, I will call the question on that then. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, that carries. So item 3, recommendation 3, which is,
Can I ask
Director
for a
Gisborne?
5-minute bio break?
We can have a 5-minute bio break.
Thank you, Chair.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome back. We just had a short break and we're back onto our agenda. And next up that we're going to consider is the third recommended motion, which is to include in draft 3 $120,000 from the Local Government Climate Action Grant Program toward replacement of the Land Recycling Center. Director Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. I'll move this recommendation.
Director Lennox, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just wonder if staff, I mean, there's always limited budget. I appreciate the effort to get our Lund recycling depot back up and running fully and the funds that it'll take. You know, the notes I gave myself a couple days ago were, as we see the rec center come together in a huge way, by the way, it's going to be super cool. That depot is a big part of that. And so this will be a really kind of the pièce de résistance to having that fully functional center. So I appreciate that. But you know, this is limited funding under this program. And were there any other eligible projects that we consider to be fair?
Thank you, Chair. Chair. No, I did put a query out to all of the managers, and this was the only project that we thought really met the program criteria. And so no, there were no other options for the funding.
Well, appreciate it, the staff doing this work. Thank you.
Thanks. And I have a question, which so the amounts left in this one and in the next motion are shown in our non-statutory reserves. So it shows for this one we have at the end of last year 177,000 about, with a bit of interest and then some spending planned from it, leaving 155,000. So I just want to confirm, is that the amount? So this motion would use 120, leaving a little bit left in there. And the second part is there a time limit to spend that, or is it a matter of finding eligible projects?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair. There's always kind of a 5-year running time limit to spend the funding. You know, on most of these grant programs, I'm just looking at the, okay, so funds from 2022, 23, and 24 can be held in reserve over fiscal years, but all program funds must be spent by March 31st, 2025. So we did have approval to, you know, use these funds into 2026, but they are supposed to be spent within a reasonable time frame.
Okay, that's great. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess thank you to whoever extended the deadline on that particular program, because that's pretty nice. But also quite effective. The question of staff is, and I didn't find it, I'm sure it's here in these pages, $120,000 is a substantial amount for the recycling depot. Is that going to help us substantially toward completion? What's the overall kind of cost? Like how I guess maybe for Mr. Devereaux could answer that. How helpful is this to the land recycling depot? Is that my question?
Mr. Devereaux or Ms. Grinnan, I'll maybe hand it to you first.
Okay. Oh, so Mr. Devereaux is there. I'll let
Mr. Devereaux, that's in your court.
Short, through the chair, if I may. It's actually the Manager of Environmental Services project, but this would his estimate does cover the completion of that project.
Thank you for that, and you're quite right. That's Mr. Cohenhoven's court, but you got the answer. Director Elliott.
Follow-up, because the things that you said made me think of a question. If the fund was at 155, let's say, and we spent 120 on this project, and the entire fund is to be spent this year, does that leave the $35,000 on the table with nowhere to go?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair. No, we understand that we can bring that $35,000 forward to 2026, and we should be getting more money in 2027 again that we could add that to. The understanding is that we don't have to repay it because it's an ongoing program.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Are there any other items or questions? Seeing none, then I will put the question to a vote. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. So item number 4 is to include $13,018 towards the cost of a third-party accessibility audit of the QRD buildings. And before putting the question, maybe I'll ask Ms. Greenan to clarify, and just my understanding that that is exactly the remaining amount according to the reserve budgets. That's all the money left in that COVID-19 restart, safe restart funding.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this was a small balance that hadn't been allocated during that program. And I did confirm with our financial analyst at the province that we could use the balance of that funding towards something that meets the eligibility requirements. And we've assessed that the accessibility audit will meet the eligibility requirements.
Okay, that's great. So what is the will of the committee? Anyone want to? Director Elliott?
I would move it if that's what we're trying for.
Director, yeah, that's what I'm hoping. That's what I would like. Director McCormick, seconded.
Second.
Any questions or debate? So I'll just make one comment, which, you know, we have had an accessibility committee. We talked in the past about when we purchased the building, the room you're sitting in, that part of the building, accessibility in relation to some items. So I think this might be, you know, it's not a lot of money, it probably doesn't go very far, but it can help maybe do at least an audit and identify some elements we can do to help improve accessibility to people in our region. Is there any other discussion on this? Seeing no hands up, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, $13,000 for an accessibility audit, and I guess I'm just curious, has there been anything identified within our facilities already as, you know, potential issues for accessibility, and maybe it might be, I don't know, better use of funds to use the COVID-19 funding to fund those upgrades on things that are already identified, or is that a separate thing?
Ms. Greenan, I'm not sure who that would go to, but
thank you, Chair. I think that might go to the Manager of Operational Services to see if there's been things that have been identified other than the the audit.
Mr. Devereaux?
Yes, through the chair, we don't have any current projects identified.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands up, I will then call the question on this. All those in favor? None opposed, that carries. Okay, the sixth one, I believe, we're next. So that's to include $6,000 to retain a consultant to assist in the design of water rates for the Myrtle Pond water system. What is the will of the committee?
Move it for discussion.
Okay, and second, it's moved by Director Gisborne, seconded by Director Lennox. Go ahead, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, $6,000 is probably one of the lowest items that we see on our financial plan. But I also want to remind everyone that Myrtle Pond water system only has 84 parcels. So $6,000 is like $70, $75 a parcel, something like that. My math is probably way off. So it's a decent amount of funding, and you know, I always think about, you know, consultants, they're experts, and experts, as I recall, within the university, was experts rely on experience. They rely on past practices. And we've had a lot of changes to, you know, Bill 44 and 46 related to housing and how we design our communities. And I'm just wondering, is there a better asset that we could potentially utilize to, you know, get a different perspective on how to do cost recovery, because it's essentially parcel tax and user fees. And by asset that we can utilize, I'm referring to the community members out in Myrtle Pond. We had a delegation, I believe, last month and the month before, from folks out in Myrtle Pond that were interested in, you know, some kind of advisory committee. And even myself, you know, if I could get the monthly consumption, I don't need to know which properties are using what, but kind of like, hey, here's the spread of the 84 parcels and what their water consumption is over the last couple of years. I'm sure there's some very intelligent people out in Myrtle Pond that can take a look at that and go like, okay, this is how much money we need. It's all in the financial plan. And this is how we're currently doing our cost recovery, and, you know, crunch the numbers and like, do we necessarily need to hire a consultant? When, you know, I'm always blown away by the intelligence and passion of the community that I live in. So, but I'm not in Myrtle Pond, but you know what I mean.
Okay, well, maybe I can ask staff for clarity on what this funding gives us. Is that what you're looking for, Director?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, is there a way that, like, could that information be provided you know, what is the consumption of the 84 parcels without actually identifying which parcel is actually doing the consumption, because I'm sure that's a freedom of information thing. And because I hear from residents in Myrtle Pond, and they love crunching numbers. There's some real smart cookies out there.
All right, so maybe I guess is this also for Mr. Devereaux?
Yeah, and I
think
guess it
Mr.
also
Devereaux,
ties
you-
in with, you know, with the upcoming Lund water system potential. I'm sure we'd probably want to try and have some consistency between, you know, how we do cost recovery. So maybe we kind of lean a bit more towards Lund when we start taking a look at Myrtle Pond, because I don't think we're quite there yet with Lund. And I know it gets frustrating when you have, say, one water system under a certain rate structure and then you get Lund under a separate one. I guess the first question is, could that information be shared with, say, the community? The first question, and then what is the status of a potential advisory committee?
Yeah, Mr. Devereaux.
So through the chair, if I get the questions, monthly consumption per household with no household names, that could probably be easily passed on. That's something we could do. The second question, I forget already.
No, sir. I guess it's a little bit off topic. So, but you know, I guess if there's an update on if there's an advisory committees in the works. Or
Oh,
if
the
there's an update
advisory
on-
committee.
Yeah, I believe they were going to talk to our corporate officer and some of our staff, but wondering if there's any.
That would be a question for the corporate officer.
Okay, corporate officer.
Thank you through the chair. The staff have met with the group. We're going to meet again in about approximately 5 weeks. And we did not talk about water rates specifically, just future goals.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Those are all my questions
Director.
for now.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I'm in support of the motion because we need to have professional. I could understand a member of our staff possibly taking this on, but given the workloads that they have, hiring a consultant makes sense because we need to have an unbiased opinion on water rates. And I think to consult those individuals who are on the system, it's impossible for them to have an unbiased look at this sort of situation. I think we have to go outside.
Great, thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I think that if you're looking for alternative ways to get to the same thing by including your local group, you run yourself into some trouble in that it's not funding neutral, because anything that staff organizes in a way of inclusion also costs money. Having an advisory group and making sure they get the expert information they need and all of the analyses you need takes staff time, which then gets charged back as well. And you may end up with more money being charged that way than $6,000 to have a professional provide that information for the advisory committee to consider if that's what you want. Because typical processes that would try to come to consensus on matters that are important to everybody are not cheap, and they take a lot of staff time. So I just wanted to point out, it's not cost neutral. You're not going to get it cheaper that way.
I never said it was.
No, I'm trying to
Okay.
provide some input into the thought that you had.
Okay, are we ready to put the question on this one? So seeing no other hands up, I will call the question on this. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That one carries unanimously. And we're on number 6, which is Director Lennox.
So moved.
Second.
So moves. That's $4,500 for to retain a consultant to assist in the design of sewer rates for London Sewer. Okay, Director Lennox, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I mean, the points have been raised already are very valid about our need to know. And I would be biased on this as a user, and nobody wants to pay more. But what it's made me think about is, I think I would just recommend that our consultants have open disclosure. It might be the same folks doing all this, and Lund Water will be part of the discussion in the near future, whether it's for the receiver to do or for the QRD. And that, you know, for Lund, these decisions will compound themselves on the users of Lund, right? So with our budget 2026, in general, on water, on sewer, on payer. So I just, I think I'm in full support of this because I need to know, again, more of an unbiased position, but our users really need to know every option.
Very good. Is there any other discussion on this? Seeing no hands up, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? That carries. Okay, well, we're
That was it.
through all the motions. Now anything to discuss, but I'll wait for others. Does anyone want, oh, my internet is unstable. Let me try again. Is there any other items that people would like to discuss? Okay, I'll just dive into mine, which is Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question, kind of in relation to the service reviews. A service withdrawal, as I understand, goes to referendum typically. I'm just asking, or I guess a question, maybe our staff know, they might not. Do we know like an estimated cost of what, putting something like that to a referendum question might be? So that if, say, the social planning service to do a service withdrawal, what would essentially be that cost?
So Ms. Green, so I guess the question I would
If you don't know the answer, that's fine.
Yeah, about what the cost would be, and if we have enough in, I guess it would be an EA feasibility. I'm not sure where it would come from, but if that's money that would be available. Oh, I see our corporate officer has her hand up, so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. No, we don't have a cost estimate for that. It would require research, and so we would want for direction to do that work. And it would be probably, yeah, it would take a little bit of time to gather it, not a significant amount of time.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. So I do have I want to discuss the LIVFD reserves a bit more, and I guess in general. So if you look at the budget on page 247, so the budget right now includes $60,000 for transfer to reserves as an expense and $75,000 for prior year surplus. So the fundamental question I have is, what do we do with the surplus? And in particular, what is the appropriate balance between using it to mitigate short-term tax increases, and how much we should put towards saving towards longer-term needs? Because we identified or clarified the surplus is about 134,000, maybe a little bit less. So let's say it's 114,000. So there's approximately $40,000 not accounted for here. And I think the balance, by balance, there is a strong need to increase reserves. So some of that could appropriately go to reserves, but arguably, and a lot of it, or a fair amount of it, should go to mitigate taxes for two particular reasons. One is the Lasqueti taxes are slated to go up at 8% in draft 2 compared to the average of 2%, so at a much higher level. And most of that is due to LIVFD, which is slated or estimated at 15% increase. So to mitigate that with that surplus would be appropriate, because that's a very significant increase. So using that to bring it down. And I guess so I have some draft thinking on how to do this, and so what I would like to do is be able to use the extra surplus to bring down the tax increase so that it's either no increase or within inflation or 2% in line with everywhere else. And also use some of it to increase the reserves, at least as a top up this year, not for the whole long-term financial plan, because I think 60,000 is a sustainable amount for the taxpayer. So the question that I have first is that something that would need to happen at this meeting, given the uncertainty in the actuals and how much surplus there is? Would it be, is there time to consider that division between, where the surplus goes, between how much of the surplus would be to offset tax requisitions versus used to increase the reserves? Would that be okay to do in the March meeting? Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. I think being that we're, if you do leave a bit of a cushion in the projected surplus, then you should be okay if you wanted to bring more of that forward. But the benefit of doing it now is that when I bring draft 3 forward, you'll see how that actually impacts the total tax rates in your area. Whereas if you leave it till draft 3, then, you know, you and the public doesn't get to see that until we actually go to adopt the budget. So that's the big difference. The nice thing is, if, like I say, if you get it incorporated into draft 3, then you can see how that actually impacts overall.
Okay, so maybe I'll and maybe this might help. Maybe I'll send the draft wording. And you know, I don't really know what the right amount is. That's part of my problem. I don't know whether it should be adding $10,000 more or not. So I have a motion to send over, but Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And you've brought up an interesting discussion that I think I was hitting on last year as I continue to learn about reserves and how we do this. And a question that I asked our staff a couple months ago now about, like, what is, again, to not try to get into the line items and understand how we affect our residents. Remember the question I asked, like, what does it take to make a 1% change in the tax, either plus or minus, for our citizens? And I think that was, I'm trying to think that way. To the point you've just made for Lasqueti, that would be different, north, like each area. And then, so as you were talking, I look up, okay, what are our, you know, surplus? And I think it says, you know, it could be stood to be wrong here, but North Side Fire, 30,000. And again, that's just under 1% of a tax change in my area. I understand, I could be wrong. I'm just kind of ballparking, but the point I'm trying to make is that that's what the directors are getting at for our staff. I know that they're trying to adjust to what we're saying, but when we say, hey, you know, I think that's what we're aiming at. You know, it's such and such a percent is too high. It takes this many $1,000s in my area to make a 1% change. You see, that's kind of where I'm thinking. So I just wanted to flush that out, because now you've made me look at things too. But there's a balance. What do you send to your reserves, etc. So appreciate your line of reasoning. There's no question there, but
That's fine. So that saved, took some time while our corporate officer got my motion over, which, you know, if it gets second. So basically it's got a two parts, well, three parts. One is to take all the 2025 surplus and include it as revenue in 2026, which would, right now it says 75,000. So that would be whatever it is, 115 to 134 is what we talked about. Second is to increase the transfer to reserves from 65,367, which is 60,000 plus interest on the current reserves, so 65,367 to 85,000, so adding $20,000 of that surplus. And that the second clause is that transfers to reserves in the 5-year forecast for future years remain as in draft 3. In other words, if we do this increase, that's because there's a surplus, and that shouldn't necessarily become the baseline. But I'll if it's seconded, I'll speak a bit too. Okay, so is that maybe is the corporate officer, is that
Thank you, Chair.
is the wording okay?
Yes, I was just going to suggest that this also be elevated to today's board meeting. Oh, maybe
okay,
just to make sure that it makes it into draft 3 appropriately.
Oh, right. Okay, and so does that need to be on the end? So maybe consider that as an additional piece. So you've heard some of my rationale. I've talked a fair amount about this, and Director Lennox is quite right. There are surpluses for the other departments. I'm happy to help any directors figure out what, you know, or ask Ms. Green and she'd be able to tell you, but what they work out to, you have to look at the revenue, how much is included and what the extra is, but they all have significant surpluses. And there's a reason for that, and that's because fire departments are highly uncertain, the numbers. We don't know how many calls there will be. We don't know how much training will be taken up. So everything's got a contingency, and that leads to a fair amount of surplus every year, which is good, because that means we, you know, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. If we haven't done enough training, that's not good. If it's because call out costs are lower or equipment replacements lower, that's good. So by doing this explicitly as you know, using that and thinking about what is the rationale for reserves makes sense. As I mentioned, the current year taxes are 8% right now for Lasqueti, which is 4 times higher than the rest of the regional district. CPI is 3%. So I would like the overall taxes to be, you know, closer to the rest of the regional district. That's almost all due to LAVFD, which is 15%. And represents about half of the taxes for Lasqueti. So if you wonder why I always talk about LAVFD, it's primarily because that's half of our taxes. So that's one of the rationale. And yet at the same time, that has to be balanced against longer term needs. We've seen, you know, in the past, you know, all fire departments have strong needs for sufficient contributions to support capital replacement in accordance with our asset management plans. We have asset management plans. And last year, in saving to reserves in LIVFT was 60, but prior to that, it was in the 10 to 20,000. So we were saving 10 to 20,000 for years, which was clearly insufficient. We increased that to 60,000. And so that's I think a reasonable level. On a per capita basis, $60,000 going to reserves for LIVFD is equivalent to about 465,000 going to reserves in Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department on a per capita basis. And that's about 50% higher than what's actually going into MVFD reserves. So that's actually a substantial amount. It's maybe from an asset management point of view, got to be compared with the capital needs. But from a taxpayer point of view, it's a significant lift. And so that seems to be a good basis for the 5-year forecast. That's why I have that second clause there. But the reserves, they're at 373,000. So that's not high, not low. I mean, higher would be good. It's not nothing. But there's capital spending of 109,000 projected. So really, by increasing it by 20,000 into the 85,000, if that's possible, then that would come a lot closer to filling that hole, so the reserves don't go down or don't go down by very much this year. So that's the purpose is to balance the surplus to support increased transfers to reserves as a one-time increase with mitigating taxes. And as a final point, I'll just say I'm planning to hold a public town hall in the next few weeks, and I'll hear from the public. They'll tell me what their thinking is on this. And so the only caveat I'd like to put in is that, when the actuals come in, if there's a big change, if there's a big unforeseen shift in the actuals, then then there may be needed for further adjustments. But if they are on track with where they are, then I think this could be a good place. And as has been pointed out, it would be good to get it in the draft 3, and then we can, tweak that if needed at the final round. So I'll leave it there, and I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on this item. All hands are down. I will call the question on it then. All those in corporate officer.
We have more than enough time to bring it to the end of the month, so I removed the clause about elevating it today.
Okay, I never said it, so it never happened. That's good. That's fine. It's all good. That's great. Thank you, corporate officer. So the motion is as was shown on the screen. I will then call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. I'm in favor. That carries. And Director Elliott.
So we're on the financial plan draft 2 and making recommendations for draft 3. And the notice of motion, it looks to be like it's also trying to make draft 3. And if we wait for the timing that's proposed in the notice of motion, it appears it would not make draft 3 and wouldn't be as good for us to not have it in draft 3. So I'm wondering if we should be making that motion here today because it's about recommendations for draft 3.
Okay, so maybe you could hold that thought till we get to 9.1.
Well, except for then we're on to new business, and I'm saying it's more, I'm wondering if we shouldn't be doing it as the business of this particular item.
Right. I mean, we could still, I mean, I don't think it matters.
Because it is about this item, but anyway.
It doesn't matter. I think it's better. We'll wait till we get there. If it's if a motion is made to adjust the draft financial plan, that's still in order. We're in finance committee, and I think that would be
well, except
acceptable.
For procedurally, we don't make motions under notice of motions. We just look at them and
Correct.
Continue on. And so if we don't even decide whether it should be a motion today or a notice of motion, we then get to notice of motions, and procedurally we're not supposed to make motions then.
Okay, so the concern is that there's not enough time for this. Is that the concern?
Well, if we do what's in the notice of motion, will it even make draft 3? I don't think it will.
Right. So why don't we ask that question if to Ms. Green, and if we follow the notice of motion upcoming on the agenda without a motion today, then it won't get into draft 3 unless we somehow expedite that through. Well, it wouldn't come back to until the committee meeting in March. Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. This is actually more of a question, I think, for the corporate officer, but I think that Director Elliott is correct because it's the notice of motion, and then if the board talks about it or the committee talks about it at the next meeting, then it it would be difficult to get it incorporated into the budget.
All right. It certainly wouldn't be in draft 3. It may get in the budget, but then it's a major change. So you're quite Right, maybe I'll confirm that with the corporate office. I see our CAO. He'll have the say on this. Go ahead, CAO.
Through the chair, it's not impossible to do, but will be somewhat tenuous. If you do the motion as suggested here, then come draft 3, no, it won't be there. And draft 3 is in the first part of March, correct? Our last meeting.
18th. Sorry, March 18th.
So it's not a week before like this. Yes, it will be. And then we'll still have a regional board meeting at the end of the month, correct? So we'll still be able to make adjustments at that time if necessary. And then when the final budget comes before you for adoption at the end of the month, it will be incorporated if it's approved. So there is time.
Without time for the public to basically digest that though, because they will be seeing it at the same time as we're adopting, right?
Well, they would have it at the finance committee meeting. We would see it.
Sorry.
CAO, go ahead.
That's the way the nature of our business works anyways. We make motions. It gets put in the minutes. The agenda gets adopted. We present to you a new package. It happens. I don't know what you're talking about as far as the public getting involved or being notified of this. They're playing along right now. They're getting all the information.
Hey, Director Elliott.
So I would like to propose that we make this motion as part of the item we're on now, the draft budget discussion. And it gives the opportunity for it to amend the draft 3, so everybody, including the public, can see draft 3 prior to it coming back as part of the final budget. I just think it's a better process. So if it's a seconder, we could just
second
So
that.
you're okay. So you're making the motion in the quotes in the notice of motion, and it's been seconded. Okay, so that motion that the committee recommends to the board that the board directs staff to include 341,385 in draft 3 for the sub-regional recreation contribution service as the contribution amount in 2026 to the city of Powell River towards operations of the rec complex. That's on the table. It's been seconded. Discussion. So Director Elliott.
I would give the floor to Councillor or Director Southcott because it was his plan to make the motion, and I would speak after.
Well, unless I guess Director Southcott has to put his hand up if he wants to speak on it.
He did.
Oh, you did. Okay, go ahead, Director Southcott. I missed you.
Thank you, Chair. So this motion is two things that I'll speak to. One is I think it is in the spirit of good faith with City Council. Second is that it refers to, or it is in reference to numbers that we don't even have yet. I guess my only reservation is that this would have to go into the budget, and therefore it would raise the possibility of money that may not be agreed to. However, and we've already talked quite a bit about reserves and surpluses this afternoon, and as much as I think we all collectively are trying to figure out how to reduce surplus for obvious reasons, that would be the one downside here. But I'll just say again, the principle behind this really is good faith negotiation with the City Council. It's consistent with the bylaw as it states, and obviously would be contingent on numbers that would probably come forward with the processing of those numbers through the city's finance department. And that's basically it. It's simple thinking, really.
And so could I ask maybe just before I recognize Director Elliott, just to ask Ms. Greenan to clarify. So the budget right now, if I understand, sub-regional recreation service starts on page 229. And the question I have is, so this would effectively, the effect of this motion would be to change, is it to change the 251,500, or sorry, the 249,500? Is that the number that's in the budget, and that would, the effect of this motion would be to increase that to 341,385, which is, if I understand, the maximum. So two parts. Is that the maximum and is that the effect? Ms. Greenan?
Not what he's asking, Chair. Motion says.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that would be, that motion would make the requisition so that the 249,500 would then change to the 341,385.
Right. So that's clear what we're doing. Director Elliott and then Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. So my understanding of what we're doing at this point in time is entering into negotiations between the service area representatives, which are areas A, B, and C, to renew a contribution agreement for rec services. And if we leave the budget as is, we're capping the amount that the contribution could be this year to what's eligible in the budget without any room for negotiation. And so if we raise the amount in the budget, we then have room for the negotiators to negotiate in good faith and land in a place that is appropriate to the costs of the services, because the current contributions are not based on costs, and costs have well outstripped what has been contributed in the past. So wherever they land that will be based on actual costs will be capped by this budget amount that we have in the budget. Should we make a decision to have it higher than where we land, we can use those surpluses to help in the future. It's not interrupting, it's not constricting the negotiations for actual costs contributions for this year. And since the city has been attempting to try and tell us what these costs are every year and saying that the contributions are not really measuring up, I think it would be nice if we went into these negotiations with a mandate to have increases based on costs or based on what is negotiated, rather than an arbitrary amount put in the budget without information appropriate to costs. So my appeal would be, just as Director Southcott has pointed out, in order to have good faith negotiations that are not overly constricted, it would be better to have a budget to do so. So putting it in the draft as the budget, the draft 3 is the budget, and even approving that does not require the contribution to be that amount. Your contribution would be actual cost based on whatever is negotiated. But it allows them to negotiate a number that is between the two parties in good faith rather than dictating that amount.
Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Can I get the motion put up on the screen?
Well, it's right here. It's in the notice of motion.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I hear a lot of conversation around putting $341,000 in the budget as the requisition. That's not what the motion says. The motion says, I'll read it out. Committee recommends to the board directs staff to include $341,000 in draft 3 of the 2026 budget for the sub-regional recreation contribution service as the contribution amount in 2026 to the city of Powell River towards operations of the recreation complex. The motion doesn't say set the amount in the budget. It says that's how much we're going to earmark for giving to the city of Powell River. And if you take a look at the background information that was submitted by Director Southcott, it's saying the requisition max should actually be $350,000 with the $1,500 for the administration fee, and $8,000 for other, and then that would leave left over $341,000 to give to the city of Powell River. So that's why I was like, hey, can we get the motion up on the screen? Because what I'm hearing from the municipal directors and what I'm reading in the motion are two separate things. And I want us to all be on the same page.
You want an amendment?
So, I'll hand to Ms. Greenan to clarify the effect. So I guess if I understand what you're saying, Director Gisborne, is the question is the difference between amending the budget to increase the requisition from 249.5 to 341, whatever is in the motion, versus allocating that fund as a contribution to the city of Powell River for the operation. That wording is that the so Ms. Greenan.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe Ms. Greenan can clarify what exactly the effect of the motion is, and is it beyond, is it doing something beyond just increasing the line item in the budget and leaving decisions for negotiation at a future date?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I apologize. You're correct. That was intended to maximize the requisition, that information. So Director Gisborne is correct that this motion would be 341,385 as the contribution amount, potential contribution amount. So the maximum requisition then would be 350,885 in order to do that, because there are $9,500 of other costs within that service.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I didn't want to call point of order on the two municipal directors, but they're talking about something that's not what the motion is. And I know we've been over this for the last 3 years. But as I understand from memory, it's a two-part process. One, we set the budget amount, and then two, the board authorizes actual sending money over. So like last year, we set the amount, and then the actual authorization didn't occur until December. There's a two-part process. So this one looks like it's kind of that reiteration of trying to do two things at the same time when they're separate issues.
So I saw Director Brander had his hand up, and then I see
Yeah,
two other
Chair, I was
others.
considering an amendment to the proposed motion to change the number from 341,385 to the 350,885, and crossing out everything after recreation contribution service.
Okay, so that motion would be to, yeah. Is there a seconder
If
for
I
that?
understand, sorry, Chair, if I understand
Okay,
that
no, go ahead.
correctly, then
Doesn't it change the intent of the motion?
No, let Director Brander clarify and then we'll ask the corporate officer.
I'll second his amendment.
And what I'm just saying is that leaves a placeholder in the budget for us to then make decisions afterwards, but it doesn't commit us to any specific amount.
So that's been moved and seconded. I'll ask the corporate officer, A, if that's clear, and B, if it appears to be in order. Is that, Ms. Greenan?
Sorry, just 1 second. What was the amount?
358.85.
350,885.
Thank you.
I'll confirm with Ms. Greenan that's the correct number. Well, first, so Ms. Greenan, you had some comments while the corporate officers doing that.
Thank you. Yes, if we could just say, direct staff to include a requisition of 350,885. So after include, put a requisition.
Is that
makes it clear.
acceptable to the mover? Yeah, okay, so corporate officer got that. We'll get so that's been moved and seconded. So while the corporate officer is working on that, I think we got the intent. I see, so on the amendment, and I see Director Southcott, and then Director Gisborne, and then Director McCormick, and then Director Lennox. Let me make a long list. I can't keep that many names in my head. So Director Southcott, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to be really clear as to what the intent of this motion was, and it had nothing to do with forcing the board into allocating a certain amount, whatever, 341, et cetera, to pay to the city. It is to give headroom for negotiation. And that was it, plain and simple. So I appreciate the efforts now to amend this motion so that it actually is consistent with the intent. And I just want to say that I appreciate that. Thank you, because, and I'm not going to repeat myself.
Oh, thank you for that. That's good. We're just focusing the lens on our camera. Thank you for that. So Director Gisborne, and then it'll be Director McCormick, Director Lennox, and Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I hate to be the procedural fellow, but now reading this amended motion, it seems to actually change the intent based on the wording of the original motion. So I'm going to ask the chair to rule whether this motion is in order, because it seems to change the intent.
That was my question for the corporate officer. I think we heard the intent, but I will confirm with the corporate officer if this is indeed in order, this amendment. And if it's not in order, the approach we could do is we could withdraw the motion and remake the motion again. So I think that's given that we heard from the writer of the notice of motion and the mover of the amendment. But corporate officer?
So thank you through the chair. Well, that's not my call. Procedurally, if you wanted to consider for this assembly to consider whether it's in order, one question you might ask yourself is, can you divide this question? And if you look at the wording, and adding words is allowed for clarity, I do think that it could be potentially divided. So that might give you a hint whether it's in order or not.
So I'm gonna rule it in order for that reason. I think the first part is just clarifying what that is for tax requisition, and the second part's being stripped out.
And that's why I think it's changing the intent, because if we're striking out the second half, which could potentially be divided, changes the intent. But
well, I mean, I see that we're spending a lot of time on this. The other option would be to withdraw the motion and to start over, but I see that we'd get to the same place. So I don't see procedurally why we would do that. Director, so I have Director McCormick on the next up on this.
Yeah, thank you. And I have two questions. When it says a requisition limit, that means the maximum, but it doesn't necessarily mean that amount. It could be any amount up to that amount. Am I understanding that correctly?
yes.
So Ms. Green will clarify, but I think what it means is if, depending on when the decision will be made, if the decision is made later of how much to allocate, the requisition would have already been done. It would just mean there would be surplus if the amount was left, if there was less provided sent to the city for this versus the amount taxed. But Ms. Green can clarify what that means.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair. Yes, that's correct. So that would just allow us to have the three requisition. In 2026, this would allow us to requisition 350,885, but that doesn't tell us that we have to spend that amount. Then how much is spent is up to the negotiating committee.
Go ahead, Director McCormick.
So just following that up before I ask my second question. So that means that the requisition will go down in the budget as 350? And then
That's
it
my
might end
understanding.
up being less. Is that correct?
Yes, based on this motion, it would go, if this motion passes, then the requisition that people are taxed would be 350,885 in 2026 for that service.
Okay, thank you.
Director McCormick, because we have to have the budget by the end of March, it would mean that amount would be in the budget submitted to the government. So that's what the taxes would be. But it would mean we would tax that much, but we wouldn't necessarily spend it all, and we would have maybe leftover surplus that would offset future years. But
thank you.
Yeah,
My
go ahead.
second question is probably for the corporate officer. This is voted on at this committee by all members of the committee, but it's a service that 3 areas participate in. So at the board meeting, would it only be those 3 directors who would vote on a weighted basis for that?
Corporate officer.
Thank you. That's our understanding currently, is that with this being in the budget, I would have to do some further research on this.
Okay, I appreciate if you could let me know. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so next up was Director Lennox and then Director Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. Just wondering if for my residents in Area A and Savory, which are different, as far as taxation, an increase from 251.5 or whatever the number is to 350,885. What are the tax implications? What's the increase to my residents? That's the question. And if you have to get back to me, that's fine.
Ms. Green, is that something easy, or is that
okay, so the impact for the regional recreation service?
Yes.
Okay. If you can give me a few minutes, I can figure that out.
Sure.
So if I had to roughly think about that, Director Lennox, the increase is about, it's 100,000 increase from 250, so it's around 40% higher than what's there already. Is a rough rule of thumb I would use. So right now the Area A without Savory goes down by 1%, so it would, would go up a bit instead.
Thanks, Chair.
Well, the thinking's
so we'll
happening.
see. We'll get the numbers. So while we're getting those numbers, I'll recognize Director Elliott, and then I see Director Gisborne. And we're on the amendment, remember, so we're talking about this amendment.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of the amendment, and if procedurally it makes it easier to change it to, like, if the amendment is not procedurally okay, we could also split it into that first part being the requisition and the second part being the stuff we're trying to remove, and you decided separately on those pieces.
We already ruled it's in order.
Okay.
Yeah, I ruled it in order. I mean, I think because CAO.
You're the chair, and I just want to remind the assembly that your ruling has been that it's already in order.
Thank you.
Yeah, no one.
Yeah,
and I think it would be effectively the same if to explain a bit, if we all seem to be in agreement. If we had just even withdrawn the motion and put forward what's on the table, we'd be in exactly the same place. It would be more efficient to carry on, make the amendment, and then vote on the. Just trying to be efficient here, and I think it's fine.
I guess my comment is simply that this amendment makes the motion way clearer and better matches the intention of what was trying to be sought after, was some negotiating room.
Yeah, I saw Ms. Greenan had some information for us, and then Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. So the impact of changing that, so we're basically would be adding 91,885 to that requisition. So that would mean approximately $3 per 100,000, a residential tax rate of $3 per 100,000 per year. And so for area A, for example, that would be about $16 per household.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Can't hate me. We have an amendment on the floor, and it says, to set the requisition limit at 350,885. We don't set the limit. The service establishment bylaw sets the limit. We set the amount. So I'm going to move an amendment to the amendment to strike out the word limit.
Okay, does that make sense, Corporate Officer? Or is there a seconder for that first before we Director Lex? So that'd be on the amendment to remove the word limit. Is that
I might have put the word limit in there by accident. There's a lot of things happening.
Okay, I mean, we could.
If we get to a main motion, we can actually be on the same page as what we're talking about.
So the most efficient thing would be to discuss this. So if we agree that the word limit isn't appropriate, we can dispense with this quickly and get back to the amendment and pop it off the queue. So does anyone want to discuss the removal of the word limit from the amendment? Okay, so I'll call a question on that. All those in favor? Opposed, none opposed. Okay, we're back to the amendment without the word limit. So that's fine. So if I understand, it's to direct staff to include a requisition of that amount, 350, whatever, in the draft 3 of the budget for the recreational service. So is there any further discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, I will call a question on the amendment then. All those in favor? None opposed. That carried. So now we got the motion, which is, where we want to get to. Director Gisborne. The main motion now is as amended. Go ahead, Director Gisborne.
Thanks, Chair. I find this process that we're undertaking right now to be very interesting. We're setting the requisition amount to the absolute limit of what's legally allowed in the service establishment bylaw. And I guess I got a question. Have we done that with any other service? Is there any other service that we say, hey, let's requisition to the maximum amount, regardless of any reason why, just
the Lasqueti Island Health Service is always at the maximum amount, but we can which is good and bad depending on who you're talking to. But I'll ask Ms. Greenan if any besides the Lasqueti Health Center, if there's other if we've done that before, hit that limit. And I think we have hit it on occasion, but Ms. Greenan can answer if.
Thank you, Chair. I just have to open up one file here quickly.
Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Chair. In our history, we have had to make application to go beyond the limit before. So it is something that has occurred with other services.
Okay.
And we have in many cases gone through earlier in the process, modified the service establishment bylaw to increase the limit. So then we can accommodate increases. So.
Yeah, and the reason I bring this up is this service was created by referendum. It wasn't created because the directors just said, yeah, I'll consent to it. It was created by referendum, and it was created by referendum with a great deal of public engagement. I have all of it in this binder in front of me. And what was presented to the public was a funding model based on operational cost, floor area, and population projections. And population, how it was split up. Now, we all know there's a service review underway. I do believe we heard our manager of financial services that it's up to the negotiation group at areas A, B, and C for actually how much goes to the city. So I find this really odd that we're going, okay, let's set the amount of the service to the absolute maximum when it's not up to the board to actually make that determination of how much actually goes to the city. It's up to areas A, B, and C. And if you take a look at the letter that was submitted for the service review, it was actually this kind of behavior that triggered it. Asking for money, set it to the max, without actually presenting the information in a public meeting between all parties. Because I believe in working together, open and transparent discussion and dialogue. And unfortunately, I had to trigger service review to kind of push us in that direction. And I do believe last year we had to kind of put a pause on the funding until we got a motion passed to invite city council to come and talk to us, because all the way back to, what was it, 2023, council was saying, hey, you're not giving us enough and there's a bunch of reasons why. And my response was, okay, give me the reasons in a public meeting and we can discuss it. And I have the information before me in a public meeting right now as to why the maximum is the appropriate amount. Does anyone have that information that I can put in front of me? Because otherwise, it's kind of becoming a, hey, we got to increase your taxes, area B and area C and area A. Why? Trust me, bro. The city says so. That's why. That's not collaboration. That's bullying. That's big power and a little power. I've had complaints from my residents, not so much about the complex, but about how this process has transpired. About how, they're saying, hey, we hear a lot about let's work together and collaborate, but we don't see it. Can we actually get that done? City council, regional district, public meeting, back up the request with the numbers in front of the public. Because right now we're saying, yeah, let's increase the maximum. My residents are facing big tax increases. This is cart before the horse. And keep in mind, the next step of a service review is you can either come to an agreement, resolve the issue, move forward, or a participant can initiate a formal service withdrawal. Bring it back to referendum, ask the public, you want to keep participating in this service? And it's interesting, I'm hearing more and more people go, if this is how the city works with the regional district. I've heard folks say, hey, I voted in favor. But if this continues, I'll vote in favor of leaving. I don't want us to go that way. But the way we're doing this is just backing up the concerns raised in the statutory service review that was submitted to the minister. It's the same behavior. It's not collaboration. Thank you, Chair. I'm opposed to this motion. It's up to areas A, B, and C.
Yeah, no, so that's good. And I just want to remind the board. So the motion is a recommendation that would go to the board in after the committee of whole, so in a couple of weeks, whenever that is. And then it would come back to the finance committee meeting. So there will be further opportunity to discuss this. It's just gets it into the process so that it's feasible, but it's not the final decision. There's still a couple steps there. Okay, so Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Understand where we're at. I just respectfully do recommend that we keep these negotiations out of camera from now on. We have enough information in the public that people can figure this stuff out. And I think any future work we do, there's no reason why would we talk about it in camera. So thought I'd add that.
Okay,
Thanks.
so are we all clear on what we're voting on? I think we got the wording. Director Elliott. Then hopefully we can get a vote.
Comment a little bit about how we're putting forward negotiating positions at a meeting where we're just trying to figure out what to put in the budget. And we don't have access to the other parties within this agreement, and it's an intergovernmental one. So generally speaking, when you do intergovernmental negotiations, you would discuss that process, which I think all sides are committed to. And maybe we haven't landed in a place where we've had those questions answered yet. And that wasn't the intention of this motion or anything we're doing here today. And it seems a little out of order to be bringing negotiation positions forward on a process that is at its infancy and trying to get ironed out. And so I think the comments about that would be the positions of those folks who would come into the negotiations and try to iron out those issues between the parties, and doesn't necessarily happen unilaterally here at this table. And we're not questioning who the negotiations are between, but just that trying to make a position that you would take at negotiations forward in this meeting when they haven't even been addressed by those folks between the parties isn't really, I think, in order. But thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I think we should avoid, and I'm gonna actually call the question, Director Gisborne. We do not want to go down the rabbit hole of turning this into a negotiation. It's a complex process.
I'm
There's
not gonna
the time frame. Let me just finish my comments. The time. If it's a brief comment, I'll allow it. There's three groups here in a way. There's the City of Powell River as a negotiating partner. There's this negotiating group from the regional district, but there's also the regional district's time frame, which is what we need to focus on, our time frame to get our budget in, and how those relate and add limits or flexibility. That's what we're talking about here. But we need, we should not be getting into negotiating discussions or talking from the perspective of one of the negotiating positions here. But Director Gisborne, hopefully if you can keep it short, then we can get a vote on this.
Yeah, I'm just going to read a very brief little snippet from the formal statutory service review submission to the minister. On February 6th, the QRD Finance Committee considered a staff report. It was moved, seconded, and carried that the highest contribution be put forward. The motion that was ended up adopted was that the board direct staff to include $234,000 in the 2024 budget of the sub-regional recreation contribution service as the contribution amount in 2024 to the City of Powell River towards operations of the recreation complex. So the previous motion was essentially the highest requisition, and I was able to convince the board 2 years ago to actually set it down to $234,000, which is actually based on the formula that was agreed to by referendum. In my submission, I also put, I appreciate that this motion was passed by the board. This was put before the assembly as a, quote, all directors weighted vote. This results in the 2 municipal directors having 7 out of the 13 votes, and they can decide how much money comes from the electoral area and goes towards the municipality. I find this to be unacceptable and unsatisfactory for the service. So that's why I'm bringing this up, because it was brought up before, and it was one of the reasons why it was submitted to the minister. It was a concern, and I'm a little disappointed to see that that concern is still alive and well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Hopefully I don't see any other hands up. So now I'm going to call the question on this motion, which is, maybe I can ask the corporate officer to read it out since we've had so much discussion. We can hear what the exact wording is, corporate officer.
Thank you, through the chair, that the committee recommends to the board that the board direct staff to include a requisition of $350,885 in draft 3 of the 2026 budget for the sub-regional recreation contribution service.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of that motion, and all those opposed? 2 opposed. That motion carries. Director Lennox and Director Gisborne. Okay, that's it for item 8. So new business. So since the notice of motion has been dealt with, I think it's a bit moot now. So we're on to question period. Is anyone in the room, or Mr. Galinsky, do you have questions if you're still with us?
I'm online, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to pose some questions. Going back to the draft 2 5-year financial plan, I noted that in going through the appendices that the city and some electoral areas, their requisition has decreased, and I'm wondering why this is.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. The main reason is that the shared service for waste management has substantially decreased in 2026.
And that was my third question that I have in my steno pad here. I was wondering why that requisition had decreased, Chair.
Ms. Greenan?
Probably best to direct that to the Manager of Environmental Services.
Mr. Cohenhoven, you're on the call. You can help out here.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So the QRD board adopted a new tipping fee bylaw on September 1st, 2025, which substantially increased the tipping fees. And that raised additional revenue in the waste management service, which allowed us to decrease the taxes in the waste management service.
I thank the manager for his response, Chair. That was very helpful. My third question was, I noted that general administration costs have increased throughout the budget, and I'm wondering why this is.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. There have been a lot of changes that we've had to make in the general administration service. So, and the main reason is, I think, just general contract changes, and we're trying to just make sure that our services are sustainable. So we have had, we have had the need for consultants for, for freedom of information requests. We've had lots of one thing that's going up is the legal fees is stayed consistent, but the consultants costs are increasing. So we have a budget of $176,956. I'm just going to look at what it was last year. So our software licenses has gone up 20,000. Legal fees are up 25,000. And the consultants has actually decreased a little bit. There's a lot of different things that have changed the administration budget. So it's not like it's not big items. It's kind of just all throughout the budget. We've had some increases throughout the budget for many different things, like director's remuneration has gone up, bank charges, computer system services has gone up. So it's just a lot of different costs. Our costs have increased for operations in the general administration.
I thank the general manager for the response. There hasn't been additional staffing and things like that than in general administration that have resulted in increases.
No.
Great.
Those are my questions, Chair. Thank you very much. I'll see you all in the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Glinski. I don't believe there's anyone else. I don't see if there's anyone in the room. So seeing no other questions, I will say the meeting is adjourned at 4:08 p.m.
In -8 minutes.